Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, Discography Breakdown. Now, we're back at you with another Discography Breakdown pretty quickly after the last one, which was when Jake and I talked about the albums of Kendrick Lamar. But moving backwards, the Discography Breakdown, which was formerly known as our B-side series, is very much a staple of this channel. We've talked about a number of bands that mean a lot to us, bands like the Dillinger Escape Plan, bands like Opeth, bands like Frightened Rabbit, The Twilight Sad, the Mars Volta. We've done so many of these videos now, and they're always an absolute joy to do. And while we try and balance these videos between really popular artists to try and sort of get more attention and get more subscribers, because that's kind of part of the grind, we also like to balance that with more niche artists that mean a lot to us and that we hope we can get through to some of those fans and do something that will be satisfying for fans of that band like us. And so this is definitely one of those occasions. We have been doing the podcast for 2 years now, and somehow, despite the Menzingers being founding member Morgan's favorite band, I believe, we've never done a record club on one of their records. We've never really talked about them in any substantive way, but here's where that changes. Morgan and Connor are here with me. These are the two biggest Menzingers fans you'll ever come across, and they are far more equipped than me to discuss this band. I will be kind of facilitating this conversation and chipping in my thoughts as well as somewhat of a newer convert to this band. But we're going to make our way through all of their studio records as well as the Hold On Dodge EP, talk about what each of those records means to us, the progression of the band through this time, the evolutions in their sound and in the songwriting, and eventually we'll rank the records and talk about our favorite songs as well. So without further ado, I'll throw over to Morgan to sort of talk about who are the Menzingers, where are they from, what are they all about?
So the Menzingers are a sort of, I just call them a punk band, but you could call them a pop punk band, Heartland punk. There are many monikers under which this band could fall under, which is interesting considering that their catalog really isn't all that diverse sonically, but they seem to stretch so far. In terms of the particular arenas that they occupy, they are from Scranton, Pennsylvania, not far outside of Philadelphia, formed in 2006. Key influences on the members in order to start this band were bands like the Lawrence Arms and the Bouncing Souls, with whom they actually did a split EP with, which is pretty solid stuff. And obviously bands like the Replacements, the Ramones all file into how this band sounds and the way that they write and the way that they compose their songs.
I even hear a bit of Against Me in there at certain points as well. Another band we've actually done a discography video on. I'll try and remember to put a link to that one as well. But yeah, definitely a pool of those kinds of alt rock sort of, but like specifically, I don't know how to phrase it, like Heartland adjacent, like super like deep American rock bands of the 2000s with definitely a punk edge and not even a million miles away from like emo, but certainly distinctly within the punk world.
Definitely a lot of shared DNA with bands like the Gaslight Anthem and the Hold Steady.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the four members that have been constant throughout the entire run of the band thus far: Greg Barnett, lead guitar and vocals; Tom May, also lead guitar and vocals; Eric Keane on bass, and Joe Godino on drums. And that's been the four since the band's inception.
Yeah, they, I think, formed in the wake of, or they kind of came together from the ruins of a couple of bands that were kind of more sort of ska adjacent, sort of pop punk adjacent. You have Bob and the Saggets, which is the brilliant name of Tom May's former band, and Cosmos, which also features Anna McKilwee of Tiger's Jaw. So these were kind of much smaller sort of smaller scale bands that eventually, I suppose, dissolved, and then sort of the key members, Tom from Bob and the Saggets and then Greg from Cosmos, as well as the additional members of the Menzingers, kind of formed together around 2006 and started making music.
And there was also close proximity to like the Jeff Rosenstock circle of everything that was happening in that greater Philadelphia area at that time on the music industry and all
Mm.
that.
Yeah, there's another band as well that I think Adam McKilwee was also in. No, it was Leo Vergnetti and Cosmos was also in a band called Captain We're Sinking, which is another Philadelphia punk band that are very adjacent to, I think there's shared members between Tiger's Jaw and actually the drummer, I think, in that band is the brother of Tom May. Anyway, and they
Greg Barnett.
Yeah, he's one of the, because they're also a dual vocal and guitar, and
Yeah.
Bob Barnett is one of them.
Yeah, they're
Which,
a
by
good
the way,
they're a good band as well. I checked them out.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure off of the back of a very random recommendation from one of you two, and I really liked them.
Yeah, The Future is canceled. That's a
Yeah, it would have
That's the
been
one.
Connor because I
Yeah.
haven't listened to that album all the way through yet.
Yeah. So there's like
It was good though.
there's a hive of these, I
Oh, yeah.
guess. I don't know if they're all Philly based or all kind of Pennsylvania based, but it certainly seems to be like a scene in and of itself within this kind of wider American wave in the 2000s of punk music. And so you have like these bands that are kind of, you know, trading off members, sharing, I'm sure, a very familial environment. And the Menzingers kind of, I suppose, got to be one of the bands that rose up out of this kind of pool of different bands to be one of the most kind of significant, one of the most beloved, maybe not as widely well known sort of across the globe as bands like the Gaslight Anthem, but I think as we will kind of talk about, as Morgan and Connor especially will talk about, this is a band where once you're in, like you're in, like they have and there's an incredible personal touch as well as a really strong musical heft and a lot of talent to this band that has deservingly brought them a number of devoted and closely attached fans. And as they have, and also they're a band that kind of revolve around certain very kind of potent and universal themes of growing up, as particularly of being in your 20s as well. And there's an interesting arc to the way that's depicted across their records as the band members themselves get older. And there is, and I imagine for a lot of people, one of the things that's meaningful about this band is actually growing up with them and sort of aging with them and kind of feeling your own experiences of growing up and of experiencing the underrated angst of your 20s can be something that you kind of follow alongside this band through their records. And that's, I think, one of the things that's most immediately appealing and kind of most powerfully sort of sums them up. They are a band that write and sing about very simple things, kind of use a lot of iconography of, you know, getting drunk, getting blasted, going to shows, making love, like having relationships, all of these kinds of like very immediate, fleeting elements of being in your 20s. And they kind of give them a grandeur that a lot of the best bands in this vein do. They're not, though they are well described as a punk band, they're not like a particularly angry or even like aggressive band, really. They're just they're very hooky, they're very easy to listen to, and they're very emotionally hard on sleeve, like very emotionally hard on sleeve, to the point where that, again, quite tangential emo DNA is kind of starts to be visible, is that you can see. And I guess the Lawrence Arms are a good, in terms of a precursor, are kind of fitting and do kind of make a lot of sense there. It's punk, but it's punk in the personal, individualized sense rather than in the kind of like socio-cultural sense. It's punk about, you know, being young and fucked up and having like these beautiful aspirational dreams and ideas, and kind of living in that state, and then how that changes, not necessarily goes away, but just how the nature of that changes as you get a bit older. And yeah, there's a lot of interesting meta aspects as well to aging and your relationship to being young in this music. And yeah, I think that's kind of how I would sum up the identity of the Menzingers musically.
Well, something about like their style of music that they play, which kind of goes back to what Morgan was saying, that basically we just call them a punk rock band because that's what they play. But it's interesting that they have such a for lack of a better word, simplistic sound, but they're like amongst like, I don't know, music nerds and stuff, their genre labels and stuff are still debated a lot just because they have a very unique style that is very obviously inspired by bands like the Lawrence Arms and Against Me, Alkaline Trio. But I think all these labels just kind of go to show what they're able to do with just a very, simple rock band instrumental layout, simply written songs, but with incredibly powerful songwriting.
Yeah, and that's really what it comes down to, is just the quality of the songwriting, especially once the band really gets going into their second and third albums onward. Everything really starts leveling up from a songwriting perspective on that end.
Mm. And on that note, we should talk about their debut record, which came out on Go-Kart Records in 2007. Very much, I think, the sound of a band kind of wanting to hit the ground running and just sort of start putting out material and finding their identity. The record's called A Lesson in the Abuse of Information Technology. It's worth noting that Greg said that it was recorded very quickly. I think he estimated the recording time as being like 10 days. It's an interesting record. It's very, very scrappy. But it has a lot of, I think you can see a lot of the DNA of what the Menzingers would become in there. It's maybe a little bit more like irreverent to some extent, like very kind of early replacemency at certain points. And there is indeed, like, I guess as a part of the legacy of some of the punk that they draw from, there is even a Clash cover on this album as well, Straight to Hell. Morgan and Connor, how do you kind of feel about this record, and what do you sort of think it represents for the band in this early stage?
Yeah, it's definitely, obviously a starting place for them. And you can kind of hear to some extent just how quickly all this came together. Because the way that I've heard it said from the band was that Greg heard the Lawrence Arms' "Oh Calcutta" and said, I have to be in a band that sounds like this. So it all kind of came together after that. And this was the year directly after that, 2007. So in parts, it's awkward. It's not exactly what I would call a consistent album, but the spirit is there right from the beginning, basically. It doesn't always sound great and the songwriting's not always there, but it's a strong start. And every now and then you get peeks at what the band would sort of evolve into.
Yeah, for sure. This is definitely the album that I probably have the least passion and the least thoughts about, but that's not to say it's a bad record. I do think it's a very solid starting place for a band like this. I think there's a plethora of great songs on here. I think in particular tracks 2 through 4 I really love, especially the title track, which is my absolute favorite song on this record. Just that song alone is like best representative of who they are at this stage, because it's just straightforward, drunk, screaming at the top of your lungs, these sing-along punk rock lyrics. Like, it's definitely far from perfect.
Yeah, that's the thing about it. It's only a 38-minute record and it somehow feels too long, which is not great.
You can tell, like, from like a production aspect, that it does feel a bit rushed, although I don't think it necessarily sounds bad. Like, I don't listen to this and I'm like, ugh. Yeah,
I
but
wouldn't
like
say so either.
Yeah, like the guitars are nice and loud, but I do think, personally, I think that they're a little bit like sharp. They have this kind of over saturated intensity to them that like feels a little bit out of place with what they're doing here. But at least it goes hard,
Yeah, songs like the 4th track of that 2 through 4 track run, Ave Maria, particularly where Eric Keane on bass gets to shine with that great introduction riff. That's a really strong song, probably my favorite thing here. I also really love the Straight to Hell cover, but I mean, that's an unimpeachable song, and a band like this is not going to fuck that up. So a lot of the appeal of this record for me comes down to just how young and hungry the band sounds. And they didn't have the chops to necessarily back that up. But a sense of progression for this band really puts a lot of things in context and is just in general nice to have. And the songs that are really good here are definitely like what I would call essential. I don't think this is an album that you can skip if you're going to listen to this band.
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
absolutely. And I basically would co-sign most of that. I think that the title track stands out as the best thing here, and I think, as Connor said, the most sort of indicative of where they would go. The Clash cover really holds up as well. But as you guys have kind of suggested, there's not a lot to really report here, other than the sound of, as we've said, a band kind of wanting to get up and running, put some material out after their initial demo tape, and kind of figure out where to go next. And I think, yeah, laboring on that influence of the Lawrence Arms and O Calcutta does really explain, I think, a lot of the desire to make this so quickly. But I think it's fair to say that it does not take this band long to figure out their identity, because in 2009, you have the Hold On Dodge EP, which is where the band, I think, really starts to ignite, and also starts to, I think, have a sense of songwriting, structure, and composition that's a little bit more thoughtful than what you get on Information Technology. Because as fine as that record is, a lot of the songs they feel very half-baked, they're very short, and yet there's more potential there than fully fledged ideas. And yet the ideas are fully fledged on Hold On Dodge, which is a remarkable EP, definitely a standout, and certainly essential listening. If you're experiencing this band, don't overlook it because it's not one of the LPs. I'm sure that you two would love to speak about what's so great about this EP, and also like how it represents a step up from the debut.
Cards on the table. This is top 5 EPs ever for me. Up there with, it's not as important as something like Seosin's Translating the Name or Alice in Chains' Jar of Flies, but just in terms of how much I love each song here, it is up there with EPs like that for me. I think something like Sunday Morning, the first track on here, so completely steamrolls everything on the first album in terms of quality in just 1 year.
Yeah, Sunday Morning is up to this point easily, in my opinion, the best song in their career. It's such a fantastically written song, and in this early stage, you'll notice that both Greg and Tom have a very like almost strained delivery, which I appreciate, and that's totally, the punk rock thing to do. On the debut album, I feel like sometimes, specifically specifically Greg's voice, he can sound like I'm like, whoa, calm down there, you're gonna hurt yourself if you keep going like that.
Yeah, this is not sustainable, sir.
Yeah, but like on a song like Sunday Morning, it's just like it works so perfectly. It's just everything he's delivering. Yeah, just screaming his heart out.
Performance.
And the whole like refrain at the end of "Don't worry, brother, this will blow over." Just like you hear that and you can't not sing along to it.
Yeah, that to me is like song. That's the moment where this band like arrived, specifically with that refrain. But the whole song is great, like absolutely one of their best songs. And yeah, and I second what you're saying about the vocal performances as well. Like it's definitely slightly more refined here, but you do get some of that real hardcore screaming. And it's interesting now because I spent so much time with their more recent records. It's interesting to see kind of how much more sort of refined and polished and just kind of more tasteful, I suppose, they've become, and how they've kind of moved away from that. But it gives the EPs like this, like a real, and also just in general, the faster tempos and stuff, and the real kind of energy here has a particularly kind of kinetic feel within the context of this band's discography. It's a really urgent EP, and it really stands out for that urgency.
Best indicated by the chorus of Red, White, and Blues. So kiss me before it's over, if only for a minute.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Lilith Evie is a great song as well. Like basically
Yeah,
almost as good as Sunday Morning for my money. Like I absolutely
yeah.
adore this track. This EP just so flows so beautifully together as a kind of singular sort of 11-minute experience that it's so difficult to kind of pick apart the songs individually. But man, do they hit.
I especially love like the like Lily Avi, like the beginning of that song where they do that like almost bluegrassy type vocal harmonies at the beginning.
Yeah,
It's like a great early indication of kind of their Heartland rock style that they would pursue.
that's like that's kind of a country song in a lot of ways, and it's just in punk rock clothing. I mean, there's not a song. The only song on here that is less than a 10 out of 10 to me is the song with maybe the greatest song title of all time. They speak of my drinking, but never of my thirst. And that's a 9 out of 10 to me. So I think every song here is essential listening and just some of their best material overall. I want to shout out a bonus track on the streaming versions of this. Yeah. Kentucky Gentleman represent.
It's basically like a folk punk song almost.
Yeah. And there's not much in their catalog that really gets at the sense of community that this band creates, because it sounds like it was recorded at an acoustic show that they were playing, or not even like a show, but like somebody's party.
Yeah,
probably.
there's like 10 people there or something, but
Yeah.
they're all singing along. It's
Everybody's drunk.
This is the thing about this band, like throughout their career, but like particularly in the early stages, you can like almost like smell the alcohol fumes kind of coming through your speakers when you're listening to it. It's such a like I don't really drink much beer, but it's like such a like when I'm listening to this, I just want a pint. Like immediately. I can imagine potentially being a dangerous band to listen to in the wrong circumstances if you're trying not to drink. But man, does it have that whole vibe, and does it make that whole thing feel triumphant?
Wouldn't know a single thing about that.
I have on Rate Your Music, sometimes I haven't done it recently, but sometimes I like to do tags for certain albums just for fun. And one of mine is I use the tag Chuggin' PBR, and it is heavily inspired by these guys and other groups like Titus Andronicus and Japan Droids. Like it's that type of music where it might not like someone might hear the Menzingers and be like, oh, this is too simplistic or whatever, like shut up. But more importantly, like this is that music that you sing your heart out to, you know, as loud and as possible. And that's a lot of the appeal of what they do. I will say real quick about Hold On Dodge. I have one single gripe as a whole, which is just, and this is typical of me, but it's kind of the production, the mixing. I do think it's a little bit muffled. The guitars are like kind of blaring and the drums are really quiet, but it's like at the end of the day, I don't care because the songs are just so much more well written, and the guitar work is itself really the instrumental work as a whole is improved. And yeah, it's an essential EP.
Yep.
100%. And it does not take long for us to get to the next release from the Menzingers, which comes, I think, slightly under a year after the release of Hold On Dodge. In 2010, we get the Menzingers sophomore LP, Chamberlain Waits. And again, the step up kind of continues here, not just in terms of overall quality and songwriting acumen, but also, quality and sound as well. Like, this is a record that, I don't know, for some reason, when I was getting into this discography, maybe it's just because the artwork is so like just really poorly rendered online in a lot of places. Like I was assuming this was going to be
it's poorly rendered on here.
Yeah,
that's just the quality of the photos.
I was gonna it's kind of like the cover art frankly looks like knockoff Exile on Main Street, but I'll let it slide.
And that might be the idea.
I was assuming based on that this would be like a similarly lo-fi sort of record to the debut, that it would kind of just be more scrappy, more sort of punky. And certainly it's punky as you would come to expect from this band, but it is a big step up in sound quality as well. This is a record that sounds fantastic. And still, of course, there would still be yet even more upgrades to their sound quality in general still to come. But this is a record that sounds great. And it is a record that feels like they've taken the promise of the songwriting quality on Hold On Dodge and really figured a way to extend that and to really kind of flesh that out into the LP format. While this isn't close to being my favorite Menzingers LP, and I do think that it is a bit front-loaded, which is not to say that the back half doesn't have great songs, but just not as consistently as the front half. Despite that, it's still a record that I enjoyed a lot more than I was expecting to, and that I've come away very fondly about how kind of, again, like the songs are more fleshed out and developed, but they're still pretty short. So you get, I think, a band that, as opposed to on information technology, where it feels like they're just kind of playing these songs until they run out of energy or run out of ideas or kind of don't really sort of finish them in a super satisfying way. Here it feels like they figured out a way to write quite satisfying and fulsome songs, but also keep them relatively short. Like my favorite song on here, for instance, is actually the opening track, and that's barely 2 minutes long. No, but that's my second favorite song on here, actually. Never mind. But it's one of my favorites. And they absolutely pack it with, it doesn't feel like any time is wasted. And same goes for really like most of the really short tracks on here as well. Like even Come Here Often and No We Didn't sort of make the most of their really short runtimes too. But I'll get into my favorites a little bit later on. You guys love this record. I know that this is a record that represents basically the beginning of the Menzingers, like proper canon greatness, aside in terms of LPs anyway. So Morgan and Connor, why don't you tell us all about what this record represents in terms of stepping forward from their previous releases and why it's such a great album?
If I may, no pun intended, because Tom May. So there's a quote about this album from Tom May himself that he did an interview with punknews.org. And I thought I could just read it because it really was kind of the perfect, not even just for this album, but just for this band, what they're kind of all about. And he says, "We had a practice space in Scranton that overlooked a large arms manufacturer called Chamberlain Manufacturing Corporation Scranton Army Ammunition Plant." Jesus, what a name. It was such an eyesore, but it employed a lot of people in the area. The idea of Chamberlain Waits is about regular middle-class kids going to college, getting a job, and becoming a part of the system. Not just the military industrial complex, but the huge consumer-driven culture we're a part of. And it's all just waiting for everybody, and we're trying to escape it. So what's so great about an album like this, just thematically, is that it is a punk rock album at heart in sound, obviously. But instead of kind of taking a direct, angry socio-political approach like most punk bands in the past, they take a very like personal, anecdotal approach to the songwriting. And I just gotta say, man, I absolutely fucking love this record start to finish. Just absolutely. This record, I didn't listen to it until after I listened to other albums like On the Impossible Past and Rented World. And actually the drummer in my band showed me this album and I was blown away. I was like, holy shit, I never knew that they sounded like this. Because right from the get-go, from those first 5 songs, just an absolute flawless streak right there. There's such an amazing sense of urgency and energy, not only to the writing, but to the playing as well. Like, I still think that this is, from an instrumental standpoint, I think that this is their most impressive record. There's a lot of little moments, like on a song like Deep Sleep, where like in between some of the lines in the verses, the drummer just goes into this dance beat just out of nowhere. I absolutely love that. My favorite track here is actually Home Outgrown, which is just an absolute
love that
a colossal
song.
banger.
Love that song. Just a great shout.
It's so fucking good. Again, just instrumentally, the way the guitars in that kind of instrumental section playing those octaves like do 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 do. Then another one comes in playing that. I'm just saying it because I don't know how else to describe it, but just that one part alone, it just sends chills down my spine. And then the way that Tom, who leads the song, is just screaming, "I'm not going home!" Like, man, it's just such a fucking great record.
Greg 100% upgraded from Lesson into Hold On Dodge vocally, and Tom has always sounded good, but on this record, Tom is like, I don't know how tall the dude is. When I met him, he was like a head shorter than me, I remember, but I was also I was buzzing. But he sounds like he is 6'8" on this record. Just a beast of a man.
He sounds like he's the Spanish love song singer who is like 6'8" or something.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And that dude sounds like he's 5'3". The first 5 tracks on this album are just like, Who's Your Partner, I Was Born, Home Outgrown, Deep Sleep, and Timetables. All are just like still up among the absolute pinnacle of songs that this band would write. God, yeah. We gotta talk about Timetables.
I was about to say the fucking shit that was right out of my mouth. I was about to bring this fucking song up. This is when I said this, that the opener was my second favorite song here. Of course, this is my favorite song here. This is like, again, like Sunday Morning. It's one of those like songs when as soon as you hear it, you're like, okay, this is like one of those perfect songs from this band. Like this is one of those moments where the band just kind of like coalesce and actually distill like the absolute perfected version of what the band is all about and what they can do, like lyrically and musically. Lyrically, I mean, this is just like one of their most like evocative songs for me. Like there's a lot of songs in the Menzingers discog that are like very storytelling based, and often they do kind of tell the same sort of stories. Like, you know, I met a girl and we drank beer together and we listened to punk music and I'll remember that night until I die, all those kinds of things. And it's, you know, there's an extent to which it can become tropey across their discography, but the reason it often works is because there's so much heart in the trope that it just feels like the most like powerful execution of the trope that you've ever heard. And Timetables is like such a perfect example of that. Like there's so much in this song that is like kind of cliche and almost a bit hammy, like the fireworks on 4th of July references and you know, some of the ways in which, you know, their relationship is described in the movements that they make and the distance and all that sort of thing. And the scenery of like, you know, Gen X America, you know, growing up. And it's very like, you know, it's something I can't relate to a lot personally, but there's something so like classical about it. And that's, I think, what makes it really powerful. And I like I'm sure this is a line that's already very beloved, but I have to shout out the line about arguing over which Bad Religion album was better, because that is just like one of those little details that's so like, you know, it's come directly from personal experience, and it's so like well deployed. Amazing song.
Suffer, by the way. This is what I'm talking about when I say that Greg Barnett in particular is on some shit when it comes to songwriting. Like, because yes, these are all ideas that have been explored before in ways not dissimilar to how these ideas are explored on a song like Timetables. But just from prose alone, because Barnett in particular is very prose-like in the way that he writes, I think. It's just like on another level. Like this, the song is like once she came like a vision in the night, I fell in love before the morning arrived. She wore a blue dress to combat the heat, drank beer from a bottle and danced in the street. Then I heard her singing something fairly familiar, a tale of two lovers in the thick of the summer. They would kiss There in the moment we kissed in the hammock, we argued over which Bad Religion album was better. I thought No Control or Suffer. Then she became queen of the neighborhood parties, while I was an unknown boy along for the ride, kept the guitar right by my side. It was better than conversing with the kids I didn't like. It's worth noting that this song has no structure. It's like basically only verse until it's a chorus and then the song's over. And it just, the verse itself is like, okay, here's an amazing hook. Then here's another better hook. And then here's a hook after that. And it's not, and it feels like nobody takes a breath in the song until, well, maybe if you want to wander around outside tonight, that part where the song is sort of like, okay, and then we do it again.
Yeah,
and
it's like as far as storytelling songs go, it has this kind of like feeling of like something that's being remembered like in real time. Like you can it feels as though Greg is kind of like recalling this night vividly, like laying down in bed or something, eyes closed, kind of recalling this night vividly, and you're kind of being walked through every detail as he relives it in his mind. And the kind of like constantness of it, like the pace of it, like you say, like not really getting a breath until after the first chorus, like that's so key to that effect when you're like trying to fixate and like keep every detail of the memory in your head, so you're going through it as quickly as possible, and so you don't like lose anything. It's, again, I almost feel like I'm giving the game away a little bit by talking about this in so much detail now, because it's something that's so true of so many Menzinger songs that are still to come. But here it's kind of like, really, this is the first time I think that aspect of who they are is just really like perfected.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's 11 out of 10 song. Yeah, the line, I drove home with fire in the sky, fiddled with the dials, and stumbled across something that you were always humming. Like that.
Oh,
You
fuck me, man.
Yeah.
That's
And the way in particular that he delivers the fire in the sky line is just like seared into the wrinkles of my brain. It's just, it's as good as music gets. It don't get better than this.
And I mean, shout out to some of the deeper cuts as well. I did say that I think that this is a front-loaded album, but there's some great songs in the back half of this record, like particularly the last three, I think really stand out in my memory, and particularly the closing track as well, which I think is another really fantastic song and one of their best closers, actually. That to me is one of the absolute standouts as well. Like, again, you have some of this imagery that's super like, I mean, one of the influences that we haven't really talked about, because it's less of a sonic influence and more of a spiritual influence, is obviously Springsteen, right? Like so much of this feels like the Born to Run era, kind of like iconography, and like, you know, cars and racing around and watching the sun come up, and kind of God and the devil, and the drinking lyricism and stuff, and Chamberlain's waiting down at the bottom of the city of hell, or heaven itself, as the whistle she sings, my hands building weapons for kings, while somebody's drinking my last ration of victory gin. I'm sober as sin as my hands start to shake. I fill with postmodern debates while Chamberlain's waiting. Like, beautiful writing here. And that refrain at the end of build our mistakes to the clouds, then blame us for dreaming out loud. Like, how do you write that and then not retire? Like,
yeah, like
it's the early stages of their career.
And they just summed up 21st century life in 2 sentences.
One song that I just have to mention is one of my absolute favorite songs they've ever done, which is Rivalries.
Yeah. It's the juice.
Jesus Christ. The way that song starts, like kind of slower, it kind of is like, oh, it's kind of more folky. A lot of these songs kind of actually have a bit folk tinge, like Timetables, like that guitar lead at the beginning is a very like folky lead. But Rivalries specifically, the way it almost starts, and they do this on some other songs that we'll talk about, like Lookers, where they kind of started off as almost a folk song, but then they just ramp up the speed and then just dry. And man, the way some of these lines are delivered by Greg, like, I'm going to get in fighting fit, I'm going to let my liver play offense. Like, who says that? that's amazing. Like,
That's
or
like that was one of the moments where I really thought of the Hold Steady, who are like one of my favorite bands in this vein. They write so much about like drinking specifically, and Craig Finn has a lot of like turns of phrase like that. And I'm a sucker for those kinds of lines, even if they might seem like a bit kind of like silly as metaphors. They just kind of have a tone of irreverence that feels true to like the way that your mind is when you're drinking and when you're kind of getting fucked up like that. It's great stuff.
Mm-hmm. And again, like I said, like the just not even just the musical, but the emotional urgency of like a lot of songs here. Again, like Rivalries, like when he says, "I'm going to get back all that's lost. I'm going to regain rightful intuition," and then like the hook that he always says at the end of these is because I'm running out of excuses, because I'm running out of time. Like, I don't know how old he was when he released this album. They're probably like in their early 20s, but it's just like just that feeling of like when you hit your 20s and you're like, oh shit, I'm running out of time, aren't I? Like it just when life falls apart, I'll eat my words. Like,
well, one of the things that's most compelling about this band is that, I mean, I imagine since they had been in bands for probably close to a decade up to this point, right? So I imagine they weren't that young. They were definitely in their 20s. But the thing about this band that's always been super appealing to me is that as they go on, like, it's not necessarily about experiencing your youth in real time. It's about kind of revisiting like a period of your life that maybe was 5 or 10 years ago and kind of living through that. And the thing about their records is that as they get older, that 5 or 10 years ago becomes a slightly later stage of their lives. And so the tone of that recollection shifts. Like, it's usually always sticks to the same kind of like good old days, sort of like wistful nostalgia. But there is, I think, the emotional tone of it does shift in subtle ways. Like, I think here you have a little bit more, some of the earlier records, I think the dramatics are a little bit more kind of over the top or like theatrical or like super kind of emo-esque because of the way that when you're a teenager, when you're like getting through that stage of you know, being like 16 to 19, you think in that way, and things do feel like, you know, apocalyptic emotionally. And so as they get older, or as the recollections start to shift towards later stages of being in your 20s and being nostalgic and being fucked up, the tone changes, even though it's still like a nostalgia or like a sense of loss. It's not the same as it is here. Like, and I think I can see why people get really attached to these earlier Menzingers records, because there is like an emotional rawness to them, particularly this one and the next one, that I think makes, you know, it's a recipe for like getting super emotionally connected to this band, especially if you encounter them at the right stage of your life as well. I feel like you have to really discover the Menzingers to truly get it. You have to really discover the Menzingers before you turn like 25 at the latest. I think that they're best. You're not as going to be as likely to form that connection if you discover them later in life, but if you discover them at the right time, as is the case for you guys, they can just kind of permanently imprint themselves on your heart.
This starts a 4 record run of 10 out of 10 records. And we just,
yeah,
this is like Morgan's like me when we get to like the midnight organ fight and Frightened Rabbit, because that's exactly what I say as well. Like, this is the beginning of a 4 album run of 10 out of 10 albums.
Yeah, this has easily become one of my just all straight up all-time favorite punk rock records, among other ones that we'll talk about later. But this record, well, there's several other amazing highlights. I Was Born is a perfect song. Tasker Moore Station, absolutely love the pace that song goes at. I also really want to shout out the Brendan Kelly background vocal feature on So It Goes. Brendan Kelly, of course, being from the Lawrence Arms.
Lawrence Arms, yeah, that's a really great song too. Fuck.
Yeah. One last thing I'll say about the album as a whole is that I think this is actually even though it's not their most acclaimed album, I think this is a great starting point for a lot of people who might want to get into this band, primarily if you're into more energetic, for lack of a better word, visceral type punk rock, because this thing is it's 12 songs and it's just over 30 minutes, so it doesn't waste your time at all. It never feels like it's dragging, and it's just there's just so much bite, so much flair.
Yeah, it's their
And
shortest
again,
record by some distance, actually.
yeah. Even though this punk rock music, and typically punk rock is pretty simple musically, this is probably their most technical album. So if you're really into that, then I would highly recommend checking this one out first if you haven't checked them out before.
Well, on that note, let's move forward then to a very ceremonious album. And it's almost like, you know, it almost feels a shame that we get to a record this momentous so early in this video. But I mean, the Menzingers did that. 2012, like year and a half really after, or close to 2 years actually, after Chamberlain Waits, we get, there we go, on display for all at home to see. On the Impossible, we get Boobs, the
Morgan
album.
Morgan just tops me, right? Or not in that way, but Morgan just topped me with
different show.
He thoroughly cucked you with that
yeah,
signed vinyl,
with that signature.
Yeah, so On the Impossible Past, this is the Menzingers' most canonically beloved and most heard record, generally regarded as their masterpiece, I believe. Like when you talk to people who are super into the general scene of punk, hardcore adjacent punk, heartland rock adjacent rock, emo adjacent, all that sort of stuff, whether or not they're super into the Menzingers, this is still a record that gets cited as one of the most kind of important and fully satisfying and just holistically momentous records in any of these little subgenres in this whole musical world. I remember shortly, like within weeks, if not like less than that, of me meeting Morgan and like us sort of becoming online friends, I was listening to this record because I heard how much it meant to him. And so this record has actually been in my life as long as Morgan has. And so I have a relationship with this album that's actually quite tied to the friendship that Morgan and I have. And I think that this record, like, even though there's actually other records that are even more Morgan core than this, like Go Farther in Lightness, for instance, that mean more to me as well. Like this is a record that, like this and Anberlin Cities are like records that I solely associate with Morgan. Like these are just Morgan albums through and through.
That sweet, sad bastard music.
Yeah, exactly. And so I cannot listen to this record without feeling like I am, you know, embodied in that special, like, just person that Morgan is. And so anyway, I'm not going to get stupid about it. Great record. And yeah, thoughts are plentiful, but I don't want to steal any from you two. Yeah, it's an album that they made. It is an album that turned 10 years old just a few months ago, actually. And so, yeah, stupid that we didn't celebrate it then, but I guess maybe we were kind of thinking that we would do this, so we were waiting. But yeah, 10 years old. Fuck.
I'll be honest, I have nothing to say about this record.
Oh shit.
No thoughts, head empty.
This was the album that got me into this band, as with many people, because it's the most popular and the most seminal record, as Riley has said. But for me, I got into this album when I was 15 or 16. I had heard about this from some online buzz, like when I was back using Sputnik Music, and I saw how beloved this record was on there, and I was like, okay, I'll check it out. And I was infatuated with some of these songs that I was hearing, and I told my bandmates about them at the time. I can't remember if they also discovered it on their own, or if we just had a mutual, whatever. That's not the point. Point is, me and my band bonded especially over this album, to the point where we traveled 45 minutes down to Lincoln to see them live. And at that point, I had been to concerts, but I had never been to shows where it's like only a few hundred people. I'd only been to like big stadium ones, big arena concerts, which are cool and stuff. But the Menzingers marks the first time that I went to a show that was of smaller size. So I didn't know what to expect. And once they came on stage and started playing, I don't remember. Oh, the first song I think was I Don't Want to Be an Asshole Anymore. That moment is one of my most fond memories of my life, seeing these guys live and being right up there, just screaming the lyrics with my fellow bandmates, everybody just jumping around, just having the time of their lives, just screaming these lyrics. And that's when I realized, I was like, music, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to study, for better or for worse. This is what I want to play music like this. It felt like a specific moment in my life that I will always look back on so fondly. And it kind of goes to the Menzingers themselves. Like the way they write songs is when we talked about how they recount these special memories in their lyrics. And just seeing this band live was one of those extremely fond memories that I have. And that's basically how I discovered this band. And ever since then, this has just been easily one of my all-time favorite records. In fact, I would go as far as to say that this is the best punk album of the 21st century, in my opinion. Maybe just the best punk rock record ever, man. It's just,
Yeah,
we can get into songs, but I want to hear from y'all.
yeah. There are 3 records that I like more than this, and that's it. So, and yeah, none of them are punk rock records. So there you go.
You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah. So we can start with the first track. Good Things.
I remember.
We can start with the first track. That's understatement of the century.
I
Holy shit.
remember hearing this for the first time, like, and it's like it felt like a paradigm shift moment. Like, I mean, I'll be upfront. Like, this isn't one of my favorite records of all time, like it is for you guys, but it's an album where, like, 70-80% of the time, I'd say I am fighting back tears of joy, like, and also just catharsis. Like, and for me, like, when this first song, like, I like, it's so simple. It's not even particularly like there's no poetry to it whatsoever. But the opening line of "I've been having a horrible time" is like one of my favorite openings to a record ever, lyrically, because like it's a real kind of let's cut the bullshit moment that represents so much of like what the appeal of this band is in general. Which is not to say they can't be poetic, but just to say that, like, sometimes they, instead of obfuscating the feeling or focusing in on imagery, sometimes it's just literally about, like, you know, you're essentially being the fucking therapist, and you're taking it in, and you're hearing directly these thoughts and these feelings just kind of spilling out. And yeah, and it's this beautifully simple song. Like, at the end, by the time you're getting towards like halfway through it, you're essentially just getting that "why all good things must fall apart" repeated over and over again. I also really like one of my favorite Menzingers lyrics ever. Like, when we would take rides in your American muscle car, I felt American for once in my life. Like, that's obviously like, you know, there's obviously meaning to that and significance to the fact to that what that line represents about, like, you know, belonging within a particular culture and kind of like feeling connected to like iconography or like ideals of the place where you live. But obviously I'm not American. So like, this is like, I listen to this record and I listen to this song, and it's like I feel American, like, for once in my life, in a weird, strange way that I can't even really explain. And there's a beauty to that. Like, there's like, one of the interesting things about the Menzingers, they don't do it like and with a super heavy amount of detail, but there's some subtextually throughout their music, there's a lot of interrogation of like the identity of the American and like what it means to be an American, like what it means to have this really strong attachment to these kind of like beautiful ideals and icons of like the American experience, but also feeling distant from the things they've come to represent and the way they've come to be kind of like, symbols of regression in culture. So like your relationship between like feeling really attached to these like, maybe there might be masculine ideals or like, conservative dreams, and then kind of reckoning with the ways in which those kinds of dreams and ideas have kind of become corrupted. And that's, I think, a core theme in a lot of this band's music. And of course, it gets very explicit in the most recent two records, but those lines are like the perfect distillation of that feeling of like, and it's something that I feel like all the best sort of heartland rock or all the best kind of like American, big band leaders, people like Springsteen, it's a feeling they have tried to explain and unpack in a lot of their most famous music. And it gets misconstrued or it gets oversimplified by people who aren't paying attention. But there's a lot in there, and I can't even really speak to it because I'm not American, so I can't speak to the complexity of like reconciling your identity as an American with like, what that means and your relationship, maybe distance from a lot of what comes with that. But I feel it when I listen to the song, right? It's heavy, it's intense.
There are a few, maybe nothing more cathartic than both screaming along to this song live and also being able to, in that moment, to be cognizant of the fact that literally everyone else around you is screaming it just as loud, because there's not anybody who shows up to a Menzingers concert and doesn't know these words. Like, this is one of their most foundational, important, integral songs.
This is fucking scripture.
That's the word of God. His name's
God,
Greg. Yeah.
Motherfucker named Greg.
Like, I really love what you said about that, like, last part where, it's more specific in terms of the American aspect, because like, he says, I felt American for once in my life, and then he says, I never felt it again, which I think is the thesis of this album, because a lot of what this album is about, through, again, more personal anecdotes, is kind of disillusionment with the actual reality of the may have heard the American dream, which is a common concept that is, notorious for basically being bullshit. And like what Morgan said about like all those people like around you that's screaming the lyrics, like, yeah, the song, it's a catchy, fun song, but like when people are screaming this, like, and screaming that, just that almost like a rallying cry, so all good things should fall apart. It's like everyone knows what they're talking about, and everyone, especially here in this country, like feels that. They feel betrayed in a lot of ways because they were, if you ever grow up in this country, you know that there's just so much like propaganda. And when you grow up with that and get older and realize like it's not like that at all, it's just, you kind of get that angry, upset, but sad feeling, which I think this song, it just perfectly represents.
And I mean, the thing about the Menzingers is that as a band, like one of the things they represent is pure escapism, right? Like one of the criticisms that I have seen levied is that like their music is so much about like lingering within these, very rose tinted ideals and nostalgic like dreams of a perfect time. But like the thing is, like, I don't doubt, like, absolutely not. I absolutely don't doubt that the Tom and Greg are cognizant of that. And I don't believe that they are ignorant of the fact that a lot of what they're singing about is this idealized vision of the past that may or may not, accurately represent exactly what it was like, but is the extent to which maybe things are embellished, or maybe like certain aspects are made kind of more glorified or beautiful in your memory than they really were. Like that's a purposeful choice, and it's a coping mechanism, right? Remembering in that way and lingering within that is a coping mechanism, and it's not unhealthy either, inherently anyway. And it's meaningful, I think, to have music that speaks to that, that celebrates that, because a more cynical version of this band, there's probably is a band out there, but I can't think of them right now, but a more cynical version of this band would take this kind
Spanish
of
love songs.
Would take this kind of like, this topic of like viewing the past through this kind of fond sort of nostalgic lens and kind of blurring out, the ugliness and sort of, romanticizing all of that, would view that as kind of like cynical and regressive and like, the pathway to self-destruction. But the Menzingers view that as the logical way forward in a weird way. Like some of their later records, as we get into, kind of reckon with, the extent to which you can keep doing that as you get older. But there's never at any point like any sense of judgment or, negativity towards like choosing to, color over your life and the world you live in, to try and kind of keep it as beautiful as possible, even if that means kind of shuttering out certain aspects of your reality. And, it's something that feels, regardless of whether you're American or not, but I'm sure especially if you are, more potent, the more fucked that things get.
Yeah, it's like you hear an intro like this that is just so unbelievably perfect. And I'm thinking, when I first heard this album, I was like, how are they going to top this intro? And then immediately they hit the last chord of this song again to start the next song.
I love the way these kind of, like, to me, like, spoiler alert from my list, but like these first two songs are kind of like together as one entry on my list, because like it's cheating a little bit,
yeah.
But like they're so like you can't listen to one without the other. I can't even just put on Burn After Writing. I have to listen to Good Things first.
Yeah. I mean, they work so well like on their own, but when you listen to them together in succession, it's just incredible. And spoiler for my list, one of my all-time favorite songs and my favorite song that they've ever done, Burn After Writing, man. Like I don't know where to start with this song. Just, it's funny, I usually prefer, if I had to choose one, which is trivial to do anyway, but if I had to choose a vocalist / songwriter for this band, I tend to prefer Greg's songs, and he's kind of taken more of the lead on the albums as they've gone on. But Tom primarily takes this song and just kills it in every single way that you could kill a song. Like, fuck, someone say something, because I don't know where to start.
Very few moments of catharsis in general than the sort of instrumental bit between the first and second verse on this song, with the really high guitar line and someone in the background shouting 1, 2, 3, 4 as it fully kicks in.
Oh my god.
And especially when they do that live and everybody counts. God, I've never done heroin, but there's no way it's better.
There's just like a feeling that is reached in the kind of chorus of the song, the sing along, the way that the melody is kind of just, it's such a beautiful. This is the thing about one of probably my favorite aspect of this album, if I had to pick one, is how good the vocal melodies are. Like not even just like the songs themselves and the guitar riffs and all that sort of shit, but just like how there are vocal melodies on this album that will just make me cry. And this is one of them. Like, I can't even I can't even get that tone.
And that's like
there's
the
no way to
top
do
of
it
Tom's
without
range.
Yeah,
there's no way to do it without putting your whole pussy into it.
Yeah, and I can see
Oh yeah.
why he doesn't maybe necessarily reach for that like as often as as super often, but when he does, like, God. And I mean, then you go into the obituaries, right? Which is like the fucking, I made a comparison when we were talking about this on Twitter to No Future Part 3 by Titus Andronicus off of
Hmm.
The Monitor, because it has that whole like this song is that refrain of "I will fuck this up, I fucking know," like one of the most hookiest vocal refrains, and it's so like "You'll Always Be a Loser" from that Titus Andronicus song that they both evoke the same feeling in me. Yeah, it's cathartic, and it's not even like super. I mean, it's a song where it's pretty tough. Like it's a song about self-loathing, and it is a song about well, it's not even really that. Like, it's a song about like kind of feeling as though the future is futile to a certain extent, and it's not even like that it lingers in self-loathing super intensely, but it just feels, it's that feeling of like of just kind of being bewildered by how little control that you have, or how little control you think you have over the future. And it's a mind state that's really easy to get stuck into. It also has reference to one of my favorite books, Pale Fire by Vladimir Nabokov. The I'm the Shadow of the Waxwing Slain lyric, obviously the album title as well, is a reference to Lolita. And that notion of the impossible past, I think, ties in nicely to what I was talking about, like about relationship between being American and like certain sort of ideals or icons or images or things to aspire to being kind of poisoned in some ways. But yeah, this is a fucking unreal song. And it goes into my favorite song on the record, which is I mean, I still haven't exactly decided on my specific number one song on my list yet. I have a couple that I'm tossing up between, but I will say this is one of them. Gates is like, I mean, this is the one Menzingers song, or maybe one of two, that no matter how many times I hear it, I legitimately cannot listen to it without getting like overwhelmed. Like, doesn't matter how many times I hear it. This is the song that I just holler along to. In the car last night, actually, I was fucking screaming my lungs out singing along to this song. This run, right? The fucking start of this record, the first four songs in particular, although it certainly doesn't drop off after that, but like the first four songs in particular, like, man, like, it's just, you see God.
So many lines on this album hit like in the feels too, like on Obituaries, where he says, "I curse my lonely memory with picture perfect imagery," which goes to what what they always talk about,
Are you just talking about
living in nostalgia.
how you just talking about how you write, Greg? That's just what it's.
That goes into
put the whole
like
band in one line.
Yeah, it's kind of like Burn After Writing too, where that song kind of takes like an actual writing approach to the lyrics. Like, the songs are about, the plot does not develop, it ends where it begins. But Gates in particular is also a very special song. One of the reasons is because this was one of the first songs that my band ever recorded and put online. Actually, I still think it's up on SoundCloud if you look up Blandford. Shameless plug. It's such a beautiful song, and it has probably my favorite line that they've ever written, which is when he says, "You'll carve your name into the Pawpack Cliffs just to read them when you get old enough to know that happiness is just a moment."
I like that makes me want to throw up.
This song, like
I just hear that, and the way he kind of just trails off, like he just kind of like very softly sings that last "happiness is just a moment." It's like,
this song,
what do I even say?
Has the same energy to me as like Jimmy Eat World's Work, which is another song that I like to listen to when I'm in the car and just kind of like fucking holler along to, like that song's refrain, like I want to take a ride and get out while we still have time, is the same energy to me as marching up to your gates to throw my lonely soul away. And like, there's just like a particular like breed of song that's specifically designed to emotionally fucking destroy me, and this song fits into that category beautifully. Like, But it's also like, because of the melody, again, like there's a kind of sense of like, even if the subject matter is more dour, there's a sense of like triumph to it, like just because of the way that the lines are sung, the melodic choices that are made. And that's the Menzingers. The beauty of the Menzingers for you is that, you know, in comparison to a band that like Jimmy Eat World, who I love, who will absolutely linger in the most dour feelings of all of that, the Menzingers were always trying to find a way to kind of twist it upward. Even if the lyrics stay dark, the musicality will rise above that. And it continues across this whole record. Like Ava House, I think, is an underrated song. Some beautiful, like, again, dark lyricism on this. I saw the knife, now I'm leaning forwards. I'm two wheels barreling down your way. You can't touch us, we're untouchable. Lament the beginnings that we celebrate. Like there's so much like, it's defiant joy in some ways. And like, it's, again, like with, as I was talking about with Chamberlain Waits, it's super dramatic. It's super kind of like theatrical and like, you know, emo-esque, especially with like leaning forwards into the knife and sort of shit like that. And, you know, because of how much the band believe in it, because of how real it feels, it works.
This is like, up until this point, from just a musical and instrumental standpoint, this is like their most simple record, but it's really, I think, serves the purpose of contributing to the songwriting. And even then, like, sure, like what they're playing is pretty simplistic and easy, you know, but it doesn't matter, because like a song, again, like Gates, that guitar line just gets stuck in my head, do 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 do, and it just sounds so nostalgic and powerful. And
like,
man,
the song is also just like really fun. Like a song that's lyrically that much of a bummer has no business being that bouncy.
this kind of occupies a very similar place that an album like Clarity by Jimmy Eat World does for me, which is an album that I discovered in high school. And ever since then, like short lines just live in my head. Like I'll just be sitting there, and then all of a sudden my mind just hears, I'm pretty sure this corner of the world is the loneliest corner in the whole world. And then I just I just get in my feels, you know, like
No, I gotta sit here for a moment.
I
yeah.
mean, you guys, you know, you guys have both been in bands. Like Connor, you're still in an active band. Like, I'm sure that a song like Mexican Guitars, which is another one of my favorites on this record, like has a particular, you know, emotional power because of the subject matter.
Yeah, it's also like, especially if like you're not super close friends with people that, or someone in particular that you were in a band with, just, you know, that kicks you right in the heart balls. It's like, and the whole like bridge, I guess you'd call that a bridge of that song, where it's like, I'm on cruise control and the radio is on.
Oh god.
And like, especially with the way that Greg sings it, it's like, nothing has ever felt more urgent.
Yes.
Because does anyone know the best way to get to Mexico? Somebody tell him.
Yeah, I mean, like that lyric, like I'm on cruise control and the radio was on playing that song that we both learned at Mexican Guitars. Like it's basically the same lyric as in Timetables, where he's like, you know, driving home with fire in the sky, fiddle with the dials and stumble across something you were always humming. Like the idea of, you know, being kind of brought back to a memory, like an incredibly special memory with someone incredibly special, where music was like the core of that connection, you know, was the thing that brought you together in that instance. And like, and you know, it's a meta-referential song in that sense, I guess, because it's a rock song that's about the power of not even just the power of rock songs, but the power of like music itself and the you know, the action of like playing music. Like if you think about it, this is me doing my typical, like, you know, overly psychological analytical thing, but like, you know, playing music with someone is like it's kind of a really intimate thing. Like you are playing off of each other and you are, in sync with each other. You have to be, right? So it's a thing that when you do it with someone, there's there, whether you want it to or not, whether you mean for it to or not, like a connection is going to develop between the two of you, because you have to be able to achieve a certain level of connection in order to be able to do that together. And one of the reasons why I think Mexican Guitars is an amazing song is because, like, fundamentally it understands that. It understands that not only is music a great unifier in the sense that we can all talk about songs we love, and like, and basically the foundation of all of our friendships, right? Like bonding over music and a shared love of music. Like, not only is music a great unifier in terms of like bringing people together like that, but the action of making music, the action of playing together is like, it's the next step beyond that. And it's like when you play music with someone, you become bonded to them for life, at the risk of getting potentially a bit hokey. And the song gets that. And it's so powerful for how fundamentally it understands that. And because it's like, it's not just a song about playing music with someone, it's a song about remembering a time when you played music with someone who, and again, the implication here is this person is no longer actively in this person, in the singer's life. So it's a nostalgic thing, and it speaks to that connection that's formed. And there's so much like that's not said in this song, but that's kind of like implied, like you're an old friend that covered up your innocence, etc. Like all of this, nature and details to their relationship that you don't need to hear in a lot of depth, because you can kind of extrapolate below the surface, like what the dynamic was like between these two people. It's beautiful, man. I can't fucking do it, man. It's so fucking good.
This is one of my favorite songs of all time, because without even like writing a catchy hook in comparison to a lot of other songs on this album, it doesn't need to, because the song is just propelling at such an emotional rate. Like the first couple verses describe these nostalgic memories with this person, and then the bridge where the instruments go down, but Greg doesn't himself. He's like shredding his voice, saying, "I did what I did to get away from this, because everything that's happened has left me a total wreck." And then just this idea that I'm sure many people can relate to, of like, it's not said what's necessarily horrible that happened in the song. It could have been a falling out. It could have been like an actual like tragedy, like this person has passed away or something, but just the feeling like I need to get away. I need to go. And then when that last portion of the song hits, where he's just asking anybody, does anyone know the best way to get to Mexico? And then while he's presumably trying to get to Mexico, he's just remembering this song that's playing on the radio that they learned on their Mexican guitars, tying it back into going to Mexico, and then just culminates in this incredible climax where he just at the top of his lungs screams, "You were my old friend," and which is the first line in the song too. It's like just
the shit hurted.
Now that I think about it, maybe this is my favorite song. I don't know.
Like
it's just
we talked about like going the quickest way to go to Mexico, right? Like, again, never been to America. My knowledge is like I'm a geography nut, so I kind of know a little bit. But like, driving, if you want to drive to Mexico from Philadelphia, you're gonna be driving a while.
Yeah,
so like the implication there is like this idea of just like, no matter how far away it is, like the distance is kind of like trivial. That idea of just wanting to get in the car and just go, and it doesn't matter if it takes you, forever to get there. That shit is like, and as a way of like, implying the strength of the connection and the bond, like, fuck, man, it's fucking stupid.
It's not fair how well this song is written.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
Let's move on to Another great song. We still haven't even gotten to the most emotionally devastating song on this album for me, which you might be
I
able
know
to
what you're
guess
gonna
what it
say.
is. But before that, Nice Things. This is a song that has actually taken a bit to grow on me, but man, this song is I mean, maybe you two would be better equipped to talk at this point. I need to take a minute.
The second entry into the Things trilogy.
So this is like I think if I interpret this right, like it almost kind of follows along nicely from what we were just talking about, because it seems to be a song about like crossing the border, if I'm reading it right, where there's at least some kind of border that's being crossed. Like the Western Wall's a jumbo screen at the gate. There's an automated teller machine. Sir, empty your pockets, please. I guess it's maybe just metaphorical, but like again, the idea of transit seems to be like continuing here.
Yeah, I think it's just about the American dream and sort of using either border crossing or just like airport security or something as a sort of metaphor for that. I lean more towards the border reading of the song just because the repeated last lines of the song, climb the wall before the fall.
And then the no one is waiting for you, like that idea of like escape is maybe not as easy as like you want to romanticize it being, in the fact that sometimes when you need to escape to feel safe, that means leaving the things you love, and that's fucked. But it's true, it's real shit.
It's one of the most like overtly like political songs on the album, I think.
Yeah, I think
but
so.
it's not like
it's
not
also like political in the sense of just how politics affect everyone's daily lives in some way.
Yeah. and the way it's like written with kind of these analogies to like saying like the king and queen foreclosed on their crowns, the Joker laughed and made his rounds. Like it's just such a well-written punk song that kind of uses
that's some real like know when to hold them, know when to fold them shit.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, I think of like Bob Dylan, honestly, or like Neil Young.
Yeah, Neil Young, I can hear in that too. Yeah.
It's easily one of the best songs that Tom May has ever written.
For sure.
Like
it's also one of the catchiest.
Do you want? Oh my god!
Do you want to feel safe? Oh man,
the instrumental on that song, especially when it goes from like the initial build up into the full, really gain heavy saturated guitar part, and then into the verse, like I get fired up every time.
It's perfectly structured. And again, that like refrain at the end of the climb the wall before the fall, the way it's just so much more soft. Like it's like the softest moment on the song. It's like, it's such a good song.
So there's basically a three-way tie for my favorite Menzinger song. And I will sort this tie out. I'm not going to cop out and just say the tie at the end of the video. I will figure out an order. But there's a three-way tie for my favorite Menzinger song. One of them is Gates, and another one is Casey, the next song on this record, which again, like I'm trying not to like overstate my emotional response to certain things, because then if I do that, it's impossible to like level up at any point. But like I really can't overstate how fucking hard this song is to listen to for me. Again, we get into this sort of storytelling mode, and it's a character-based storytelling, and it's focused on specific kind of fragments of specific memories. And again, those are so well utilized to kind of like, instead of telling the entire story of this relationship, you just have like these little moments that the narrator is reflecting on. Getting drunk before we did the dishes, getting high and listening to our boredom, which is a great lyric, by the way. And just, again, like there's really something to be said for the power of not dressing things up sometimes, especially if you're not a good songwriter, then just doing really blunt and straightforward lyrics can really kind of capsize you. But when you are, then having a line like, or a refrain like, because it was so much easier than dealing with everything, is like all you need. Like that to me, you don't even need to have a hint of what the everything is. You just know, you get it. And again, you have, again, it's almost getting cliche to this point, that the lyrics about, packing up and getting in the car and driving away, and escapism, and the sense with which, when you feel kind of stuck in a particular part of your reality, the only way you know how to deal with that is to fantasize about escape in an earlier part of your life. And that's, again, as I said earlier, like, one of the beautiful things about the Menzingers is that they understand that to be, they don't treat that as regressive or harmful or like not dealing with your problems. They just treat it as sometimes a necessary coping mechanism. And one of the things that really gets me in the song is the way that the narrator like directly addresses Casey, and like, I can't.
This is one of the best songs ever written.
Because it was so much easier than dealing with everything.
I sat and thought about you on the long ride back to Philly, from the way that you'd wear your hair to the way that you'd laugh when you drank too much. Before the plug was pulled, the fires burned out and all the parties grew bored. You waited tables. I waited for your shift breaks, and Gin and Casey, you'll still dance inside of me. Like, that's, again, there's ways, so many ways you could write about, like, the significance of like getting drunk with a friend, or, a lover, or whoever it is, and like reminiscing on that. But the phrasing of Gin and Casey, you'll still dance inside of me, is like such an amazing like encapsulation of like, the fond memory of like getting pissed with someone, and like the connection that you formed over those like encounters. And just like the little things like waiting for your shift breaks, like, fuck, that shit undoes me. Like, I can relate so hard to some of the just really little details in this song.
There's so many songs that are like, about missing someone or memories about someone, but the way they write so specifically, and like pretty much at least on this song, completely devoid of cliches, and just the more specific they get, it almost has this weird effect of feeling more universal, because you feel like you're Greg in this situation. Like, you feel like you've had these experiences with this person, and you're reminiscing on all these exact memories. Again, I keep harping on like how amazing like some of the simple guitar leads are on this song, like the way it begins and the way that it comes back after the bridge, but in halftime, after he after he just screams like, we could take my car because she's still got the spirit. Like, when he delivers that specific line, I'm dead. I'm done.
The Gin and Casey line, particularly in the way that he just fucking hollers it. I can't talk cogently about this song. If you know, you know.
If you don't know, now you know.
Now you know. Canceled.
I mean, the last two songs are very good too. They definitely, I think,
yeah.
The album reaches such a peak with Casey that the last two songs kind of like fly over my head a little bit. They're still really good. In fact, they're great. But they do, like, I'm still processing my devastation most of the time when I listen to this album, by the time I get to them. But they're beautiful. I love the vocal melody and just kind of the way that Freedom Bridge is sung. Like, that's just got a really kind of memorable tonality to it. And it's just a beautiful little capstone on the album.
Freedom Bridge specifically, it used to not want to be like one of my favorites because it didn't quite have like the energy, and it's what it might be the longest song on this album. I'd have to double check that, but
let's have
it is. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
But like the theme of the song, which is well, to put it bluntly, is like suicide. And it like goes through verse by verse. Like Tom is describing these like characters, and like how they were and why they decided to, in his words, take the fall. And it's like going back to their first album, there's a song on there which is probably one of my least favorite Menzingers song, Richard Corey, which isn't it like isn't horrible, but like the approach to that topic just does not hit nearly as hard as it does here, because the way that the song is kind of presented is actually this is pretty much just like a folk song in the way that it's structured. And I think it's a really powerful and emotional way to end the record. And I've really grown to appreciate it.
It's quite graphic as well, like in ways that like I don't think I fully processed until I really sat down and like actually focused on the lyrics, which I was kind of scared to do because I could tell what the song was about. But like towards the end when he's talking about like feeling his body break on the asphalt, is like that shit is like it's hard. And the thing I love about the song is that I can never quite pin down the specific tone. Like there's so many like conflicting emotional tones here, like whether suicide is an escape, whether suicide is, you know, a decision made in haste, or, you know, all the complicated aspects of the situation and the presence of people and you know, there's just so much, like it's so hectic, it's so like cluttered in terms of like images and emotions in a way that feels true to the situation. It's a bold way to end the record, I'll say that. And God, that refrain as well, something happened on the way to hell, fuck me.
I think in many ways, like, I don't know if like what the clear message is, I'm with you there, but like in many ways it is kind of like going back to the kind of the theme of the disillusionment with the American dream and stuff. And it's kind of just like this is our reality. Like these things happen, and you know, it's important to acknowledge. I don't know exactly, but that's kind of how I take it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, let's keep it moving then.
Well, before we get on to the next record, I'd like to very briefly mention the On the Possible Past EP, which was released in the same year, a little bit after this album. And it's mostly just acoustic demos of these songs, worth listening to if you're a really big fan, with the exception of the Sun Hotel demo on here, which is a song that we didn't mention earlier, but is an easy highlight for me on
definitely
on the Impossible Past, probably top 3, top 4 on there. But the quote unquote acoustic demo on here, more commonly known as Sun Hotel Part 2, which is just an acoustic performance by Greg with a different, I mean, it's basically just a different song altogether. I like it more than anything on the album, and I like the album more than most things. So, you know, Jesus. I remember you well at the Sun Hotel. Shout out Leonard. Next to Fernando's corner store grocery behind the factory spoils where no souls should be found. We kept our voices low from the city. I played you a song about the town that I was from while Dan played Casey while sipping on a Mickey's. We drank to forget that our lives were a wreck. That's when I realized you're the only pretty thing left. Greg, will you stop?
Emotional damage.
I will send you to Jesus.
I've listened to that before, and I listened to it last night after you mentioned it, because I was like, oh, I forgot about that. And yeah, the way it's delivered too is like Greg is like, you can tell it wasn't really like necessarily a perfect take, because his voice it's not like perfectly on key, but it's more about just that raw delivery and the way he like near the and kind of just is just like wailing on the acoustic guitar. Like you can just feel every single strum in your soul. And it's yeah, both Sun Hotel and Part 2 are just absolutely remarkable.
And it ends in the same way, basically, that Leonard Cohen's Chelsea Hotel ends as well. With instead, he repeats the line, "I don't mean to suggest that I loved you the best," and then finishes with the line, "I don't even think of you that often," which is like, it was like staggering when Leonard Cohen did it, and it's just as staggering, more so personally to me here. And I just like, there's nowhere for it to fit on the album proper, but like it's not even on streaming. Like what's going on, fellas?
Yeah,
what is this?
Get on that.
Well, let's move things swiftly along in another gap of only 2 years before we get to 2014's Rented World. And I want to say up front that all that hype that we lauded on The Impossible Past, please believe, I mean, you don't need me to tell you, you probably already know, this album is somehow just as good as that record.
Pretty much, yeah.
Like, I can't, how? So the maturation of the Menzingers, for lack of a better turn of phrase, is something that happens subtly, I think, and is something that develops in sort of nuanced ways, because they never really lose the spirit of their earlier music. It just, again, it changes somewhat. In Rented World, I think it is a record that has a lot of the same appeal of On the Impossible Past. It has a lot of the same kind of, you know, emotional songwriting and just really kind of pumping your fist on your chest, sort of like loud, brilliant pop punk energy. I mean, honestly, you know, there are days where I prefer this. At some points, it's an album that, yeah, shit. All right, so yeah, one of you two should sort of start this off, I think, and just sort of jump in. I mean, I think it makes the most sense to talk about "I Don't Want to Be an Asshole Anymore," which is the opening track here. I think one of their most like well-known songs, certainly appears to be one of their most streamed songs.
It's a song that, like, again, has such an incredible urgency and is so great as an opener, because it's like, I mean, the title of the song kind of describes this, what the song is about perfectly, about, you know, trying to be a better person. But man, like whenever I hear the song and when I've heard them play it live multiple times, it's just, it just gets the place going. Like it's such a perfect way to start the show.
Not to kind of be a bit dour here or anything, but this is definitely a song that hits in a particular way.
Dour during a discussion on Rented World.
Okay, not to be like, yeah, okay, point taken.
I want to stress it sounds fun. I didn't say the lyrics are fun necessarily.
This is a song that hits particularly different, I think, if you've ever known someone or been someone yourself who has had some kind of dependence on, not even necessarily a dependence or an addiction to alcohol, but who has been, you know, a considerably different person when under the influence of alcohol. And here's the thing about the complexity of the Menzingers, right? Is that so much of their music is about celebrating getting completely fucked up and the kind of communal aspect of that. But there's also like, that doesn't betray the fact that, like, it doesn't pretend for a single second that, you know, getting super, super fucked up is like this universally positive experience that's going to be for everyone and that's going to benefit everyone. I mean, and even then, like the songs about, and the spirit of their music about getting sort of fucked up. I mean, it's not really about getting fucked up. It's about what that represents communally. It's about, you know, sort of getting together and being uninhibited, you know, with people that you love. And so this is a song that, without undermining at all any of the previous songs that have been explicitly about drinking, this is a song that kind of communicates a slightly different shade to that, where you are kind of confronting the fact that you are not always the kind of person that you want to be. And sometimes you do things that hurt other people in the process of trying to find your own sense of freedom. You can, especially when you're fucked up mentally and you have a lot of shit you're trying to like deal with, and you're trying to find these little moments and ways of escaping. Sometimes for people like that, the collateral damage can sometimes be the people around them. And it's a beautiful song because it understands that. It doesn't excuse that, but it also doesn't like utterly vilify or demonize the behavior that can sometimes lead to that. It just kind of points out one of the ugly realities of how hard it is to be, truly good and truly happy, without having to, the fact that, yeah, you can engage in escapism to feel good, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But at the end of the day, you have to remember that it is still just escapism, and that you are going to wake up and maybe feel differently. And it's about confronting the fact that when you wake up and feel like, I wish I hadn't done this, or I don't like what I became out of the situation, you addressing that doesn't mean, saying goodbye to all hope of having fun or being free in your life. And it's, again, a big song for this band. It's momentous because after the last two records, this kind of like heavy sort of personal song about like, individual faults that can actually hurt your relationships with other people, that's not something that you've really had in a way this direct before. And it signals the shift the Menzingers make slowly towards, like, again, viewing your past or viewing like certain methods of escape or like, nostalgic things, like confronting the fact that they're not always like perfect as you may want them to be. Sometimes you can choose to, rose tint the past and pretend that things are easier than they are. And at the end of the day, you need to sometimes confront the fact that it's never going to be that simple. And it's really hard for me to like talk about this song super coherently because it's a complicated song, and it makes me think about people I've known and complicated situations I've been in. Yeah, I don't think I want to get into much more detail than that, but beautiful writing here. Another night I devoured the sun and plunged myself into the depths of oblivion. Somewhere along the way, I found why it feels damn good just to bleed sometimes. I mean, if you've ever like had the primal urge to get incredibly fucked up because you just don't know how to deal with your shit in the particular moment, like that, I mean, for fuck's sake, it doesn't even have to be read through the lens of like getting fucked up on substances. You could read it as being about any form of self-harm. And it's tough. I mean, in some ways, it might be the most emotionally volatile Menzinger song that we've talked about yet. I mean, shit, man, like fuck. I can't even read those lyrics anymore. I need to take a minute. It's someone else.
The shit is just like potent in a way that even on the Impossible Past isn't. It sort of maintains the poetry of so much of that album while also oftentimes being a lot more direct, and it's perhaps no better exemplified by the opening track, which I think is probably their best opener. Even ahead of Good Things, and like
that's a toughie. That's a toughie.
My favorite part of the song lyrically is I push my emotions off a bridge after taking them hostage with a shotgun. Now they're somewhere treading water, somewhere lost inside the man that I'm not.
I mean, like, come on. That metaphor, and we just talked about Freedom Bridge, right? And this is the next song in the album discography, and you're having like you're going from a song about like actually like physically diving from a bridge, like actually ending yourself, to like a song about trying to pretend as though like throwing your emotions off a bridge is actually going to fix you. Like, God, it's violent. I am being personally attacked, and I won't fucking have it.
I guess when I was saying earlier about my feelings about the song is that, like, of course you're right, it like hits in all those places, but the tone and the way they play the song, like, and this goes for like basically the Menzingers as a whole, but I listen to this and even despite the lyrics, I just have so much fun listening to the song like this. Like,
yeah.
And part of that might also be the music video, which I don't know if you have seen, where it's like, is it a Jason mask? I'm not a horror expert, but this guy with a Jason mask who like posts on Instagram like selfies with his murder victims, and people comment, "Dude, you're such an asshole," and then he gets sad and he tries to like, he's like working out and like trying to make himself better and stuff like. And that's kind of like, that's what I love about the Menzingers is like, you have so much fun listening to their music because the way it's presented is like, yeah, it's sad and hits home, but you're just going to belt this shit out. You're going to sing the whoa. That was bad, but
you're in the pit no matter what.
Exactly. It's just the ultimate like catharsis.
I don't think it really hit me until yesterday. Like, well, yeah, particularly yesterday when I read along with the lyrics for the entire album. Like, I could tell this was a dark record. Like, it's obviously their darkest album. I mean, the album cover, just the pitch blackness of the album cover betrays that. But like, Bad Things, I mean, Jesus Christ, like, fuck me. Like, this is. You know, and here I was earlier making a fucking fool out of myself talking about how this band is like, you know, compared to a lot of their contemporaries, much more sort of triumphant. And this is kind of like the biggest way you could kind of throw a huge fucking spanner in the works to that general statement, because this is fucked. Like this is some shit. Like, there's sad and like down self-loathing music that I can listen to when I'm feeling really shit to just kind of like commiserate. But I feel like if I listened to this in that state, I would legitimately, like, I would be in danger. Like, I couldn't do that. I couldn't listen to a song like Bad Things in a really volatile state, because it's just fucking, it's a song about just completely going over the edge, right? It's a song about just completely being in the middle of a fucking manic episode. The lyrics are so visceral, I don't even want to read them. They're just so intense. And then, okay, here's one of the things that's so great about this record, right? In particular, is like, the Menzingers are great at structuring a record, of course, like all the time. They're great at like putting a record together in ways where each song kind of like feels like it's building off of what we've learned so far, and sometimes even like, you know, containing certain lyrical ideas that follow on directly. But the sense of continued, sustained, just fucking devastation, and the way that it kind of builds and builds and builds and kind of elaborates into different forms across this record. It's elevated so much by the sequencing. Like, then you get Rodent, which is like
the greatest song about self-loathing ever written. My favorite song on this album, hands down.
It's just unruly. Like, I can't even, like, unlike with On the Impossible Past, like I can't even separate a lot of these songs and like talk about them individually, because so many of them just kind of hit with this kind of continuous sort of like just steamrolling feeling. One of my favorite songs on this record is Where Your Heartache Exists, which is just a song that I didn't know if it's underrated, but it doesn't seem to be like as widely listened as some of their biggest songs, but it's definitely like a top standout on this record for me.
It's also interesting that because it's just like a straight up alt rock song. Like Bad Things is kind of like that as well, but Where Your Heartache Exists is like, I feel like the first definitive one of theirs in that direction.
Yeah. And like, it kind of calls back, because you have Bad Things and Rodent, which are like so insular. Like, there are these songs about, you know, they're like you're completely isolated in those songs. Like, the only other thing that exists is the rat that may or may not be entirely metaphorical and rodent. But then when you get to where your heartache exists, like it comes back to the idea of like thinking about your relationship to the people closest to you. Again, like, I don't want to be an asshole anymore, it seems to refer to, you know, an intimate, you know, partner relationship, and where your heartache exists kind of brings that out as well. Although, again, there's some extent to which you can't tell whether like the people on this album are real or metaphorical, like, or just representative of anxieties or fears. But there certainly seems to be like a real person that's being sung about in this song, and how this girl is in some ways like an anchor, or some kind of like thing that this person sort of ties themselves to, and to try and kind of like be tethered to reality. And it kind of and part of the emotional arc of the record is kind of realizing that in doing this, you're of course dragging that person along with you. But it's also like a song that has tinges of the nostalgia and kind of the longing of their previous music too. And it kind of makes all of that nostalgia and longing feel kind of soured and ugly in a way that they don't often do. I mean, yeah, I could fucking go on. Like, my friend Kyle, Jesus Christ, like, stop it, get away from me. I did not come to this band to listen to a fucking Antlers song in fucking punk rock clothing. Just go. I don't need this right now. It's too much. I mean,
one of the most underrated songs on the album for me.
And like,
it's such a beautiful like tribute to someone who's seemingly passed away. And like that, just that repetition of sleep now, it's only getting better, man. Like, man. Like,
and then like, it almost feels like this entire like, you know, manic depressive episode reaches a kind of like there's an arc that kind of gets some kind of resolution with Transient Love, this kind of centerpiece of this album. Again, another one of my favorite Menzingers songs, hands down. Like, musically as well, I think this is one of like the best musically that they've ever made, as well as just kind of lyrically and in every other respect as well. It feels as though some kind of progress has been made here. Like, he refers to some of the real ugliness that's described in the previous songs as kind of being in the past. But also not that things are necessarily all better, but just that there's kind of like this moment of clarity here, and this moment of realization of kind of coming to terms with the consequences of the actions, that the things that you've done in your most sort of fucked up state. And that, I mean, yeah, fucking Jesus. I've talked way too much already. Like, Morgan, I mean, I know this was the first Menzingers album you heard, no? So like, tell me about kind of how you discovered this, and like what your kind of response was, and you know, how this record kind of hit you initially, and what your relationship is with it.
I discovered this record and this band from a fellow music critic on YouTube, Crash Thompson, then known as the Rock Critic. Gave a really glowing review for Rented World when it came out, and I saw that video about a year after the album and the video came out. I was 15 years old. This is a sophomore in high school, and as one is wont to do, I believed that I was in love with someone, and she did not feel the same way. Spoilers. The third worst portion of my life, I would say. But the second one that I've learned the most from, I think. And songs like Transient Love and I Don't Want to Be an Asshole Anymore and Where Your Heartache Exists get at what I learned so picture perfectly, particularly in relation to the person I thought I was in love with at the time, because this was a whole ordeal that lasted for months, and I composed myself poorly, as one does, and you can see in the lines here, But I was a pushy little one when you tried to find someone new. I just kind of waited around for you because what else was I supposed to do? At the time, it was like somebody looked inside of me and just wrote the song about that. And with the passage of time, that section in particular is like, God, that is pathetic. Like, what is, like, I get it, but also, and in a way that the song and the album in general realizes, like, that's just a scummy thing to do. Like, especially with the I was pushy, it sort of inherently acknowledges the fact that this is not the way that one should behave in a situation of unrequited feelings. And the entire album pretty much is composed of it, knowing intimately the ways in which you fucked up and wanting to make it right, literally in the course of Transient Love, but also sort of resigning yourself to the fact that you can't fix what's broken there. You just kind of have to do it better if it ever happens again.
Yeah, like a song that used to be my least favorite on this record because like it just made me feel so shit, and like the tone of it was so like nihilistic, and even the vocal melody was really depressing, is Nothing Feels Good Anymore. And I have warmed a bit on that song, but it's still like a song that I struggle with a little bit because it like gets you so into that headspace, and the way that it's sung is so like just completely hopeless that it's a moment that I really struggle with. And it's not like, at all the fault of anyone involved in making the song. It's just one that I can't. It's there's moments where this record really boils over for me into like, okay, yeah, I need a minute.
Especially with how difficult it is and how it relates to me personally, at least, and obviously you can relate in many ways. It feels a lot like Frightened Rabbit's painting of a panic attack in that way.
Yeah.
Of just there are moments on it that are so genuinely difficult that it almost harms your ability to like the record. As much as you do in fact like it.
I thought of Frightened Rabbit a lot while listening to this album in particular. I mean, not musically, obviously, but there's like a real kind of core in terms of like the spirit of this record with actually an album like Midnight Organ Fight, because that's probably one of the most like outwardly self-loathing Frightened Rabbit records. And a lot of that record is about like hating yourself because of the way you conduct yourself in relationships, because of how inept you perceive yourself to be around other people, but also like because of the fact that like you are betrayed, or you perceive yourself as having been betrayed and fucked over. And, you know, maybe there's truth to that, maybe there's not. Likely there is truth to that, but also you've kind of been a shit as well. And like the record's kind of about that. And this record is very much about that mindset too, where it's like, how do you reconcile potentially legitimate, you know, feelings of anger and distrust and frustration with other people, with the fact that, you know, to actually complain about that would feel hypocritical, like, because you have been terrible as well. And that's like, and I've talked so much about how this band is all about like celebrating coping mechanisms because they get you through, like whether or not, you know, people might agree about how healthy they actually are. But this is absolutely a record about unhealthy coping mechanisms, and also kind of a record that just acknowledges that sometimes the process to get better, you know, it's one of those like, record is absolutely the embodiment of the phrase, it's going to get worse before it gets better, right? Like it's that moment of like, because it starts with, no, I don't want to be an asshole anymore. It's kind of the realization, like, fuck, something needs to change. And then the rest of the record is about how fucking difficult that is, like about how it's never as easy as just changing, and about how like the process of getting better means you have to confront the ugliest parts of yourself in a way that no one is ever born or made equipped to do. And the fact that the record never kind of flinches away from that ugliness is one of the things that makes it so powerful. I think my favorite song on the album, not a hot take, I don't think, but a song that I think kind of embodies all of this beautifully is In Remission, which I think was the lead single for the record as well. This is an amazing fucking song. Like, again, it's got one of those like moments, there's like lyrical moments here where it's like, it's kind of too on the nose, but also like you give it a pass because of the real kind of place that it comes from and the utter like, you know, gravity that it's sung with. But lines like life is a terminal illness in remission, like that's super, you know, emo over the top, but like in the context of the record, like it hits. Like life's a terminal illness in remission, so I took the weight of it all out for a drink, and then we drove back drunk through the busy city streets. I hate how I always get nervous every time I try to speak in front of a big crowd, a pretty girl, or the police. And I hate the things that I know about you and all the horrible things that you do. I don't want to be late for war today. I want to chew up my dinner and spit it in your face, light fire to your home and tap your cell phone. If everyone needs a crutch, then I need a wheelchair. I need a reason to reason with you. Like the way that like self-loathing and then just genuine kind of hatred just overlaps so much, and like they're almost inextricable from each other, because when you do have a lot of, you know, explicit outward hatred, that can often intermingle with and sometimes even come out of self-loathing. Honestly, like so much of this record is, it's funny, like so much of this record has made more and more sense to me, you know, the longer I've been involved in like counseling and therapy and stuff. Like it's so silly. Like I first heard this record like over a year ago, and since then I've been through a lot of counseling and therapy, and it's actually like made all of this make so much more sense to me. Few records I think really throw themselves into all aspects of the mindset of being horribly depressed and also like dealing with that in unhealthy ways, whether it's substance abuse or whatever it is, than this album.
I love the way In Remission is structured. It doesn't actually even really have a chorus. It just kind of keeps going with these descriptive, almost like you said, almost like ugly imagery, which is kind of a thing with this album that I noticed, is that, like we said, a lot of their lyrics are about, you know, kind of reminiscing on beautiful moments in life and appreciating the little things. Whereas this album, I think deliberately Tom and Greg write with much harsher imagery, like specifically on the song Nothing Feels Good Anymore, where he compares himself to a fly. And I especially love the line, like the dead cat in the alley, like the garbage overturned, like the uninviting orgy or on top of some dog shit in the yard. Like, yeah, just that like bluntness and disgust. Like I was saying, the Rodent being my favorite song here, partially because I'm someone who is definitely very introverted, and because of that aspect of my personality, I tend to be reclusive whether I want to or not. And just that hook of me and the rodent and the wall have more in common after all, you know, because rodents, you know, fear humans and want to shut themselves away often. So like it's such a dark album for them. And actually in many ways I might get some flack for this comparison, but it kind of reminds me of Pinkerton in that regard, the way
I can see
that
it.
that they kind of shift. Obviously it's not written like Pinkerton, but it's just it just feels a lot darker in tone, and even actually musically too, because the song is much less of the folky inspired, Heartland inspired punk that they were doing. And it feels a lot more like heavy, loud power chord 90s alt rock, which I think is a sound that works perfectly for these songs. I do think the whole self-hatred and darker imagery of this record, while I do love it, I think it might be the reason why this isn't, I wouldn't rank this like amongst my absolute favorite Menzingers albums, because I just kind of sometimes have a little bit of a hesitancy going back to it for that reason. But regardless, it's still such a powerful album with so many perfect songs. So yeah.
Well, let's move it. Let's keep it moving then for our own sakes, and talk about
After those two records.
Okay, so this time
for the band's sake, really.
Yeah. And we actually have a 3-year gap this time, and we move to 2017. We get the release of After the Party, which is, I think...
Green.
Yeah, Green. Yes, there it is. So this is a record that I think, if you were being super uncharitable, you could describe as thematically transitional, but actually, to me, kind of feels like the conclusion of a particular arc that this band has kind of been moving on. And I mean, particularly I see On the Impossible Past, Rented World, and this is kind of like a trilogy, which is not to say that the records after or before don't kind of contribute to or touch on certain ideas within that. But these 3 records really feel, as well as being like unified in quality for me, feel as though they represent a kind of progression, right? So On the Impossible Past is the kind of super sort of nostalgic longing record, and then Rented World is the kind of like bitter, ugly reality that longing kind of represents an escape from. And then After the Party is kind of like when you get over the hill of that, of, you know, confronting the ugliness of reality, and you kind of start thinking about the future and what moving forward might even mean. Still, because it's the Menzingers, there's a lot of looking back, there's a lot of nostalgia, there's a lot of songs about, you know, the good old days and like certain experiences and growing up and being young, but it's more wistful here, I think, than it's ever been in the past. And that's something that gets even truer on Hello Exile, as we'll get to. But there's a sense that, you know, compared to Rented World, you have kind of come out the other side of something, and you're still the same person fundamentally, because how could you not be? But you have been aged by going through all of this, and you have kind of a new sort of wizened, aged perspective on it all. I mean, it starts out like almost too bluntly with the fantastic opening track, Telling Lies, with that, you know, refrain of where are we going to go now our 20s are over, right? That sense of, you know, we've gone through all of this shit, right? Represented by everything that you followed us through up to this point. And now it's about being on the other side of that and trying to, like, having no clear vision of the future, but also realizing you do need to figure out a future at some point. And it's a record that actually has taken some time to really grow on me. For a while, I just wasn't fully able to get into the entire thing in the same way that I was the previous 2 records. But I only say that because since then that has changed. And I now see this as basically equal to the 2 that precede it. You'll be delighted to hear, I'm sure. Yeah, this is a fantastic album, and certainly I think an underappreciated one, relatively speaking. I mean, I assume based on the pre-order comments that this is maybe an album that you both will have been pretty big into the Menzingers, I presume, and experiencing this rollout in real time. Yep. So you want to talk maybe a little bit about what that was like, and then what the experience of this record was like, and, you know, what it represents to you in terms of this point in their career, and what it means to you.
Yeah, I think like the first new song of theirs that I heard, or that came out after Rented World, was Lookers. And that was about a year before this came out, I want to say. And, you know, I was still in school then, so naturally the year in between that and the album's full release felt like at least 5 years. I just I do just remember them dropping that and then nothing for months. And I was like,
Yeah.
what I need more. I want more life, father. So it's early 2017, this album, just incredible single after incredible single. If I remember right, the last one was the title track. And
The
fuck,
Inhale.
fuck.
That is a song that we will all caps get to.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
I think they released Thick as Thieves like just a week before the albums, so it didn't really feel like
Hmm.
much of a
Yeah,
single. But when After Party came out, it was like,
that's a moment
yeah,
in my life.
I mean,
And this whole album was a moment in my life.
same.
Like
Yeah.
I'm not sure there's ever been an album that I was more excited for.
hmm.
And it's not just because it was the next Menzingers record after Rented World. It was because the two songs that they led with were Lookers and the title track from this album. It's the two teniest out of 10 songs that
Yeah.
ever dang did happen.
And I mean, not exactly cheerful songs either. So I'm curious about like what your take is on the tone of this record compared to Rented World. Do you feel like there is a sense of like development or of like you know, coming out the other side, or does this record to you still sound as kind of mired in the darkness as the previous record?
See, this I think is their aptly named to some degree party album, because I it's hard to associate anything other than absolute joy with this album, save for the last track. And it's less like they've come out the other side of something and more like, fuck it, we're here, might as well dance.
Yeah, like the difference is like there's still like songs that are sort of nostalgic in a sad way, but also I'd say a lot of the nostalgia here is kind of like, you know, it's not as mired in the darkness. Like I think of a song like Thick as Thieves, which is a song that's actually come to mean a lot to me because, you know, the lyrics here are about, you know, being, you know, closely knit with someone who is an ocean away from you. Wonder what that feels like. So like there's like a real like emotional connection I feel, and it's not a song that makes me feel sad. Like it's a song that feels like
Yeah.
a celebration of that bond. Like, yeah, it sucks that you're separated, but like the bond is still there, and the bond is what connects you and makes it communal. And I mean, it has like some of the most irreverent lines as well that, you know, on any Menzinger song up to this point. Like, I held up a liquor store demanding top shelf metaphors. Like, that's a funny lyric. And
Mhm.
and so I appreciate that while there's, you know, songs like Lookers are, you know, they can fuck you up, you know, in a certain mind state, and they're tinged with, you know, a kind of wistful sadness, but also at the same time I do feel that there's some sense of control, or at least like comfort in this album that the previous record doesn't have.
Yeah, it feels less like they're sad that something happened and more sad that something's over, which is just what nostalgia is. And as much as so much of this band is preoccupied with that idea, I don't think it's ever been, even on the Impossible Past, I don't think it's ever been more honed in on than on After the Party.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, and continuing on, I mean, can we talk about Midwestern states for a second here?
Ah,
Can we
That's where I am right now.
Again, like this it's a song that is localized in such a specific context that I am not familiar with, but it's a song that makes that context so universal, and then situates it within a story of friendship and of love essentially. and makes it, this universal story. Like it's like the sort of song the Menzingers have written a million times up to this point, but they still make it feel kind of beautiful in a new way. Like this is one of the most emotional. This actually might be one of the most emotional Menzinger songs for me for some reason. It's not like a song that makes me sad, but it's a song that makes me like.
It's just
feel.
everything is at a 10
Yeah.
on this song, and it heat.
We both got worthless diplomas from worthless universities, 2 bachelors in worthless studies, but at least it made our parents happy and cost a whole lot of money.
Well,
Bars.
there's no sugarcoating any of that, is there?
Mhm.
I've been attacked.
So, Connor, you haven't had a chance to say much on this record yet. I'm curious about your take on like the tone of this record and how it makes you feel, and like how you think these songs kind of compare to some of the ones that we've already talked about in the previous records.
Well, I'm in full agreement with you two, because even though it is called After the Party, to me this album feels like this is the last party I'm going to have before I get old. That's kind of and we're going to make the most of it. That's kind of the spirit that I feel like when I'm listening to this. I was browsing the Rate Your Music page, and I noticed a comment that said like, this made me have a midlife crisis and I'm 20 years old or something like that.
Yeah.
I was like, it's like, it is weird because it is like, you're right, it is sad in many ways, but it doesn't necessarily have like the manic defeating feeling of Rented World at all. It really feels like a proclamation of just like, I mean, where are we going to go now that our 20s are over? It's just, it really feels like the last moment, the last moment you have before you get old, and you're going to have it. You're going to have the moment of your life. And it's, like I said, with Good Things, I think Good Things in many ways is like the thesis, and Asshole as well, for Rented World. Those openers, hell, Who's Your Partner? I mean, basically all their openers feel like the thesis of what the album's about. And no more is that apparent than what is my choice for my favorite opener the Menzingers have ever done, Telling Lies, which
very,
very
oh my
cool
God
choice.
I mean,
I think you know what? I think God, it's really tough. I might agree potentially. It's hard.
When your new friends take a joke too literal, making you feel like the bad guy. Haven't we all been there? Like, just like, oh, I wish I didn't say that. I love the way it starts with kind of that like little guitar solo at the beginning. It kind of it has a much, I feel like this has a much lighter tone than Rented World, just based off that, like right when it starts. But really, when it slows down and gets into the bridge, where he lists all these things like tension you can cut with a knife, like a wedding ring that never fit right, car alarm that won't stop howling.
Yeah.
Decade lost in the motions, like, and
Greg.
And then it just, and then that last refrain is it wrong to say that things can change? Like, it's kind of hopeful in a way, but it's hopeful but hesitant, if that makes sense. Like, is it wrong to say that things can change for the better?
It's like, it's the courage of trying to have hope when all that's done in the past is fuck you over, but still, you do it. You try and have that hope, even though you know that the odds are not in the favor of it working out. You still make that choice, and it's one of the like hardest and bravest choices that anyone can make, I think, is to keep having hope the older you get.
Absolutely. And much like Morgan, I was there for the rollout of this album. And when they released Lookers, I like it was one of those rare moments where, because I don't always listen to new singles, even from artists that I love, because I always feel like I'm going to be disappointed, and then I listen to the full record and then it clicks in place. But I kind of had a similar moment to Everything's Teletype. When I heard Teletype for the first time, I was like, Oh, okay, here we go. Like when I heard Lookers, I couldn't stop replaying it. Like it was just, I was like, this is one of the best fucking songs they've ever written. And and so I was so excited for this whole thing. And man, the record just, it does not disappoint. And it almost, in a way, it almost feels like, musically at least, not as punk as their previous records, not as alt rock as Rented World, but it almost has a little bit of a power pop feeling to it, especially with a song like Charlie's Army, which is kind of in a way, almost, I almost want to say like a cute song. You know, tell your men I ain't afraid to die if loving Julie is a capital crime. Like, it's such a catchy and feel good, but not necessarily feel good album, if that makes any sense. But yeah, I absolutely love this record. And it's definitely one of my favorite records of the past 10 years, probably.
I mean, it's weird because it's one of their best, but there's like, it's so beautifully simple. Like there's not really a whole lot to say about it.
I think like you know, and it kind of feels quintessential to this band in the same way. Well, not in the same way, but like On the Impossible Pass is quintessential to this band, right? Like it represents this moment in time, even outside of this band, like musically, spiritually, thematically, like it represents and distills like a particular kind of emotional, complexity and state and way of being, like perfectly. And it feels like I think After the Party does the same thing for like a different, related but like different and later stage, where all of the things that were sung about so romantically and so wistfully on The Impossible Past are still beautiful and are still like meaningful and are still full of joy, but just like they're seasoned with age, and like you never really grow out of your neuroses necessarily. It's not a record that pretends that you do, but it's a record that like it's as convincing of an exercise in trying to like tell you that it's okay that remaining neurotic, and it's possible to live with that same neurosis and be happy still. There's like so much about this record that is so like because Rented World is such a record about being like so distanced from people, like wanting to be able to connect, but not feeling as though you can't do that without inevitably doing something to hurt that connection. Whereas so much of After the Party is about like, the joy and support and love with like friends and lovers and stuff. Like, I love the way this is communicated in House on Fire, which is another song about like feeling a sense of communal like pain with someone else and being able to like relate to a pain that someone else is going through, but also like helping them through that, using your own experience to kind of support them without pretending for a second as though everything's going to be 100% all right 100% easily. Like someone recognizing that someone is going through or maybe about to go through the same kind of difficult process that Rented World represents, and being able to be with them in that and help them through it. Like it's so beautiful for all of that, for that reason. And also, like, I just think that we've talked about how fucking unreal and amazing, like the 5-track run that opens records like Chamberlain Waits and On the Impossible Part. But I mean, the 5-track run that closes this album is like actually maybe like my favorite sequence of songs on any of their records, actually, once you hit Bad Catholics and onwards. Like, Bad Catholics is a song that people I know, I think, can relate to more than me, just because I didn't grow up in this kind of religious landscape, but I know a lot of people who did. But it still feels like a song that when I listen to this, it feels like this must be a cover of a song from like the 70s or something, because it just has this feel of like having been written so much longer ago than it actually is. And some of the lyrical turns of phrase in this, Bad Catholics won't darling, always dipping out before communion started. Like they feel like ageless. It feels like a kind of classic rock song in a certain sense, in a way that the Menzingers can sometimes do, but don't always do. And I think maybe part of it is the fact that so much of the imagery is like obviously rooted in childhood and like looking further back maybe than the Menzingers even typically do. But it contextualizes that within the particular kind of like, you know, sort of Bible Belt upbringing that I'm sure has a stronger kind of connection to you two than it does to me.
Yeah, Bad Catholics specifically hits pretty close to home, considering I wasn't actually raised Catholic, but a lot of my family was, and I ended up going to a Catholic high school. I love the song because it's with the first verse, it's this very like descriptive but brief story about knowing someone, like smoking weed with them and being pulled over by the cops. And I always kind of giggle at the thank God for your father's last name and all the connections that he's made. And that's the reason that they get away with it. To everyone, you're such a sweet church girl, but I know your secret. But it really, like, the song, I think, hits kind of an emotional peak in the second verse when he says that, there I saw you in the beer tent hanging with your new husband and your baby on the way. Oh, it's strange how it made me miss something long lost in the both of us now. Especially like, and this is not just like in the Catholic community, but like a lot of people that I know, especially from high school, are married and some of them have been married for years at this point. And it kind of makes me think of like, you know, like those days when you were with someone, when you were, you know, just having a fun time being young with someone, and then you see them again and they're all grown up, they have a family, and you're just kind of there like, wow, you've done a lot.
Your lives have like diverged in these incredibly different ways, but like,
yeah,
there's like something about like the shared experience of like growing up in the same space that you both had that will like, no matter how different your lives get, you'll always be kind of connected by a sort of shared experience. And it's complicated. Your relationship with people like that, and I speak from experience here as well, can be complicated because you know that, you know, you could probably never really connect with them again on like, or be friends or like really get along in any meaningful way, but you're still going to have a sort of shared experience that is going to be a thing that is, you know, a part of you both forever.
It's like a part of yourself that even people you meet now and grow closer to than these people, like these people understand something about you that the newer people in your life never will.
100%.
And
yeah,
that still
perfect.
means something.
Yeah, that's the whole, I mean, that's the whole like, everyone, you're such a sweet church girl, but I know your secret, which almost sounds like threatening, but when you put it like that, that's exactly what they're going for on a song like that. And can we talk about the next song?
Yes.
Because oh my God, this is one of my favorites. This is one of my favorite songs they've ever written. And it's such a straightforward song. Like it's got a nice
Irish
little
blood.
Yeah.
That's one of the most sticky hooks of any Menzinger song.
Little Polish in your name. Oh man.
It's so good.
A little bastard in your attitude.
And like it feels like it follows on from that last song as well, and some of the spirit of it. And you know, the extent to which he's kind of talking to this girl, and you know that they are both kind of in a different place and coming from and living sort of slightly different lives, but again connected and understanding each other in a way that you might not think observing them from outside.
Best part in the song for me is when that verse where he starts it by saying, we drove up to Massachusetts together. Your old house was just like you remember. We stayed in your adolescent room, rummaged through the boxes labeled former you. The souvenirs of happiness in the moment, your wild years that you often mention, the sands of time in an hourglass that you're always begging for back. And the way he delivers that last line, that you're always begging for back, is my favorite line delivery on the whole record. Like,
yeah. And it's one of those moments where, like, again, in the context of this band's art, it's about like, it's not just about like being nostalgic, but it's about confronting nostalgia. Like here he's talking about this person who who's living in and experiencing this incredible wave of nostalgia and being able to like observe that from the outside knowingly. It's not just about like being immersed in your own nostalgia. It's about like recognizing it in someone else. And like, so the Menzingers have like aged from, you know, being so immersed in this state to like being not completely distanced from it, but like, you know, able to see it in someone else and relate to someone else who's maybe going through something that you experienced when you were a bit younger. Yeah, in a lot of ways that makes this the most sort of best album they've made about like relationships and about like, you know, friendships and relationships and all kinds of things like that. Like it feels like the album of theirs that's the most like, you know, true to a lot of the feelings and reality of what those relationships are like when you get a little bit older than just being a teenager.
Beautiful fucking song.
Yeah. It continues through the bars, which I think is an underrated song. I love this track. It's the same sort of idea and feeling as well. Like I almost feel like you could read this somewhat as a sort of continuation of that story. And after going to the childhood home, you kind of like revisit, you know, the old bars that you used to, you know, that are like home to so many memories and so much lost memory as well. Like, and then you know, it starts to get a bit more reflective on the narrator as well, a little more first person-y here too. And it feels almost like that reflection is what leads to the title track on this record as well, After the Party, which is as perfect of a song as this band have ever written, in my opinion. Like it feels like one of the most definitive Menzingers songs. I talked about Gates and Casey as being two parts of a 3-part tie for my favorite song, and this is the third part. This song is one of the most listened songs from this band. Like even in the last couple of days, just binging through this discography, like trying to absorb it all, I would continually come back to this song. It almost feels like, you know, not to kind of talk over their next record or anything like that, but this almost feels like the climax of the arc of the Menzingers. Certainly, at least the arc of this kind of trilogy of records that I've talked about, that how I've kind of framed these albums. It feels like the big kind of finale to all of that, the big kind of summary bow on all of that, like the song that brings together everything that this band have been about, and yet then makes it feel distinctly like a song that's still within this era of the band. And you know, After the Party, it's me and you. Like that is the most beautiful kind of metaphorical summation of where this band is at, right? Like, yeah, we have all of these beautiful memories and stuff. We have all of this fun and all of this kind of these activities and actions and things that we're tied to. But at the end of the day, like when we can confront that all of that is in the past, that all of that is gone, it is still you and me here in this moment. And that's the juice.
It just goes so hard too, man. It's one of the
Everybody
hardest songs
wants to get famous, but you just want to dance in a basement. And
that like
hell that, yeah.
Like that, I love that line because it kind of like, you know, as a youth, you kind of idealize your future. You're like, you know, I want to be famous. I have so much ambition. I'm going to be great. And then when you get older, you just like, I just want to appreciate the little things in life. And I think that's another thing. That's what the Menzingers are all about, right? And like, even just the first line on this record, it's the little things my mind commits to etch behind my eyelids. Like that is just a genius way of just like describing like memories that play in your mind, like great memories that you just always want to look back on. And that's like a little thing, but it's so good. That
line is probably my second favorite thing that he's ever second favorite single line that he's ever written. And my first favorite line that he's ever written is the next song. It is on the next song.
Why don't you talk about the closure of this record, Morgan? Because it's my favorite closer on the Menzingers record. I think we can all agree it's an amazing song. But how does this record end? Because I've done enough of the talking.
Yeah. So after the party happens, and then the closer, "Living Ain't Easy," starts. It starts with the line, "In vibrant hues and subtle brushstrokes of memory. The life I've painted, I've sold for a quick 20." God,
I mean, yeah, it's like a meta song in some respects. Like, my life is on
Yeah.
display now for the privileged and wealthy. God, I despise their reassuring lying eyes. Like, obviously, it's a song about using your art as a means of catharsis and talking about your feelings and your experiences in your life, and then kind of confronting that and almost kind of wanting to like shake the listener and just say, like, don't underestimate the emotional complexity of the reality of all of this. Like, these aren't just simple little songs about dreaming of a better time. Like, this is real life, right? And I mean, I don't see how anyone who pays attention to this band could not already see this, but it's kind of like really bluntly just kind of making sure the listener realizes that this is not a band that's about platitudes, right? It's a band that wants to uncover the underlying emotional truth that's often within platitudes, and speak to how complicated all of it is in reality. And it's a darker note to end this album on, I think, but the fact that they choose to do that, I think, speaks to how complicated and beautifully true this record is. Yeah, it's a beautiful ending to the album. It's melodically, it's a fantastic song too, like just sticky and really catchy and awesome. I like the little lines where the little stuttering that happens on some of the lines as well. That's just a nice little touch that's added here. Yeah, it's a beautiful end to the record. I love it.
I love the kind of dueling guitar leads that play throughout that are just really like kind of soft and atmospheric. It just has this very like kind of melancholy but satisfactory feeling to end the record on.
Absolutely.
It's almost triumphant in a way. It's not like a depressing song, I don't think. It's just it feels very frank and pragmatic,
Mm.
where it's just like, it doesn't matter who you are, this shit can get difficult. No matter if you're living the dream or not, it's always,
Only a fool.
we're getting the emotional kind of devastation of working through all these records starting to take its toll. But thankfully,
I'm a little sleepy.
we're almost at the end now, and let's talk about the most recent album of original material, studio record, 2019's Hello Exile, which came out in October of 2019. Actually, like very, very shortly before I actually became friends with you, Morgan and Jake. And it was actually kind of like, I think you must have been talking about this album to some extent. That must have been part of the reason why I dived into On the Impossible Past as quickly as I did. But like, again, a rollout you will have been very cognizant of, and a record that I know means a lot to you. Perhaps a case where this record means considerably more to you than it does to me and Connor. So I want you to be able to do this album justice and give it the full love that it deserves. Like, what was the rollout like of this record? Like, what do you remember experiencing, and what was the album like to listen to, and how do you feel about it now, and what's your relationship with this album?
Yeah, the rollout for this record, I mean, it's, favorite band, obviously very exciting, but my excitement was somewhat muted compared to After the Party. First song they released from this was Anna, which is a song I really liked and really love now, but it does to some degree feel a little bit like, Menzingers song, and favorite band. So yes, and it was followed by America, You're Freaking Me Out, which is another song that I really like and even love to some degree, but it's not one of my favorites of theirs. Really great to see performed live. It really comes alive in that setting. The only single on this album that is like way up there for me was "Strangers Forever," which
Yes.
the chorus of that song in particular, and especially the way it's performed, is like just a cannon through the chest. So the lead up to this is relatively muted compared to something like After the Party, but I was still very excited. And yeah, I do love this record, but it is the first time I have criticisms of a Menzingers album since the first one, really. The biggest one being in how the record sounds. It sounds like everything on this album has at least one layer of reverb on it, and I'm not 100% sure what the thought process behind that was.
So
Um,
it should be said, right, that right from the offset, that this record appears, at least to me, to be a pivot towards a more like clear Heartland rock sound compared to their
yeah,
previous records. Like this is the pop punk has really kind of been, although that's weird to me that people have called this a band pop punk, I guess, but like this is where that is kind of more less apparent than ever and more sort of subsumed by the Heartland rock sort of sound, by the Heartland rock sort of influence. And a part of that is the decision to sort of shift the production style and to adopt this, as you say, kind of reverb heavy, sort of like live room sound. It feels like everything is kind of mic'd a little bit more from a distance, maybe, than on some of their previous records. And I don't dislike the way that sounds, but it also, and I don't want to oversimplify this because it seems as though the band have sanded off some of the edges of their sound here, but I don't mean that in a necessarily negative way, even if it does like hold me at a distance somewhat, because I don't think that it's inherently a bad decision for this band to make. And on paper, especially the idea of this band leaning more into their Heartland rock sound and really kind of pursuing that is absolutely not at all a poor decision and actually kind of makes a lot of sense. I mean, because I think that with After the Party, like as I said, that record has such a sense of finality to it in terms of like tying a bow on like a particular arc for this band that I would expect the follow up to sound and be different. And it certainly does sound different and has a different kind of aesthetic to it. But where I think it kind of falls short is that it doesn't really feel like it fully leans into or embraces a new sound with enough conviction. And it's also held back by the fact that, with the exception of some of its real highlights, a lot of it, subject matter wise and lyrically, feels like it's the first time the band really feel like they're treading water. Not all the time, and I will stress that, but at least half of the time, what we're getting is kind of like a copy paste Menzingers song, like lyrically and stylistically, and it feels as though some points I'm really their shtick of the wistful nostalgic kind of drawing from the beauty of the past feels like it can be a little rote at certain points here. And I mean, if I'm to get my most I guess egregious criticisms out of the way up front, I'll say that this comes to the fore particularly on songs like High School Friend, Last to Know, Portland, and what I think is maybe the least successful Menzingers song since their debut, I Can't Stop Drinking, which, I mean, is also, I think, the longest song maybe that they've ever put out. I'm not actually sure about that. That might not be right, but it's one of them anyway. And it feels very much like a rare example of this band kind of spinning in circles and almost sort of doing stuff that they've done much better before to a purpose that I can't really get my head around. And I'll also say, this is, other than the debut, by far the Menzingers record I've spent the least amount of time with. I have to foreground that because I've only listened to this album twice. And so I feel as though any criticisms I have absolutely need to be taken with a grain of salt because I haven't spent the time with this record that I have with the other big ones. That said, there are songs I love on this album. I mean, particularly the first two songs on this record and the closer, I think are great. I actually think that Anna is a real standout Menzinger song in general. Like I love this song. It really connects for me. It's fantastic. Strangers Forever, I'll echo, is a really good song too. The title track I like a good deal as well. Strawberry Mansion's okay. And then the closing track I think is quite strong, but the rest of it kind of washes over me in a way that I maybe will shift, maybe will change, but feels, again, I hate to say this, but this is the least inspired the Menzingers have sounded to me. And sure, because they're the Menzingers, the least inspired Menzingers still sounds pretty good and has some really strong hooks and general like stuff that I think fans will really, really enjoy. But for me, it's not the step forward that I would want the follow-up to After the Party to be. But it is a record that, again, I will emphasize, has some songs that I do really love on it.
Yeah, when I first heard this record, I'm not gonna lie, I was extremely disappointed. I actually remember feeling like after finishing it, I was like, that's it? This is what I've been waiting for? But in the years since its release, I've definitely warmed up to it. Mainly not, I mean, I can't say that I love the album as a whole because I think there are still some of the deeper cuts that don't really capture my attention. Some of the ones that you mentioned specifically, Riley, like Last to Know. I also would say that I Can't Stop Drinking is probably my least favorite song here. Not to say that any of these songs are bad. Some of those songs are just kind of solid to me.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where they stop.
One thing I will say, just briefly, just to, that I think kind of sums
Mhm.
up where I'm at with this record, is kind of like it's the first Menzingers album where I listen to it and I feel just genuinely sad for Greg and Tom. And like, because the songs like I Can't Stop Drinking are like, there's a sadness to them, that superficially is similar to like what you get on Rented World. But it feels like, treading water in a sense that, fuck, maybe these guys really have like, the struggle is maybe, maybe the beautiful sense of kind of like wistfully growing out of that on After the Party is kind of regressed a bit here. And maybe that's not like a failure of songwriting as much as just a reflection of reality. And I just start feeling really sad. And again, I don't want to read too much into it because I don't know about their personal lives and it would be unfair for me to make those kinds of conclusions. But that is a thing that I feel a lot while listening to this record is kind of just an uncomfortable sadness that I don't know whether or not that's intentional.
Well, when I was listening to this, my first impression of this kind of felt like, how I said that After the Party is an album that feels like, even though it's called After the Party, it feels like this is like the last party I'm going to have before I get old. And to me, this record sounds like, oh shit, I'm old. And one thing that I'll say about the production here, so I want to say that this is produced by Will Yip, who is an amazing producer and mixing engineer, noted for albums such as Peripheral Vision by Turnover. Oh, After the Party, yeah. And you can hear a lot of similarities. More recently, he actually mixed Diaspora Problems by Soul Glow.
Fuck yes.
One of the absolute best records of the year. But in some ways, the production, like when Morgan was mentioning the reverb aspect about it, I think the more roomy, distant sound works in some aspects, particularly the opener, America, You're Freaking Me Out. I think the drums sound nice and big. I really like the way they're like you really feel that like driving beat. Where it doesn't work for me necessarily is the vocals. I feel like even though it doesn't ruin the vocals, it kind of is a bit much because it's kind of jarring to hear because the way the vocals were mixed or recorded on previous albums is a bit more dry than compared to here. So it kind of throws me off, but it's not enough. It's not egregious enough to where it ruins the listening experience for me. in particular with highlights such as America, You're Freaking Me Out, which I think is, again, probably one of, if not their most overtly political songs. And while I wish it did sound a bit more urgent and angry for being that, I think it's still really well written and really catchy and really works very well. Same with Anna. I think that's a great song. Strangers Forever is easily one of my favorite songs here. I also really love, just shouting out a couple others, Strain Your Memory. I think that song is excellent. I really, even on like my first listen of the album, for some reason, I really connected with London Drugs. I don't know necessarily
Yeah,
why,
I really
but
love that song.
yeah, like Greg's delivery on that song, I think is fantastic. You just really feel like, especially in the verses, you really feel everything that he's saying. And I guess one last little gripe I'll say is that while I do think a lot of the singles and a lot of the highlights have strong hooks, I do think some of the deeper cuts don't have nearly as strong hooks. I Can't Stop Drinking, for example, which is not necessarily the point of that song. I get that, but it just kind of makes songs like those not nearly as memorable as other songs on their previous albums for me.
Yeah, it's a record that can sometimes get a bit lean a wee bit into a kind of dirgy territory, even with like the title track, which actually, I like that song well enough, but there's moments on this record where the band get kind of a bit dirgy, and it feels it's just a mode that they're not, like, at least here, they haven't particularly got down. And so you do find yourself like looking for the real pick me up moments a little bit more. And again, I don't want to say that this band shouldn't try and sound different or take it slower or whatever. Just that these efforts, the slower moments here just don't really do it for me. I think it's possible to make them work, but I don't know.
I think my biggest turnaround, my biggest opinion change when it comes to this album, and Morgan will be very happy for this, is that my absolute favorite song on this record is the closing track, Farewell Youth, which I don't know. I guess when I first listened to this, I don't think I was reading along with the lyrics, so I guess I wasn't paying enough attention, but I was reading along to the lyrics to this whole album last night, actually. And when I read this song, it just hit me like a truck. Like it's such a fuck. It's kind of a devastating song because it's farewell youth. It's it's about letting go of your youth and stuff. But it's also like I guess I never noticed the way it actually ties into someone that Greg presumably knew and was friends with, and kind of the reveal near the end of the song where he says, I saw my childhood flash before me in the death of your closed eyes. At your Irish wake, we celebrate by trying not to cry. Like that reveal that he's like, it's someone's funeral that they're at, and not just that comparison of losing someone from your childhood and losing your childhood as well. It just really hits home. And yeah,
it's crushing
song.
because like you have so many songs about that, you're conditioned with this kind of song up to this point in your career to like, to get what the feeling is in terms of like looking back on a time that's lost and a wistfulness, and then like, the reality that it's about like someone who's actually died works because like, again, as you get older, that shit starts to happen. You start to lose people, and like, the wistfulness and the nostalgia of your 20s becomes like more painful because it becomes like, it becomes tied in with actually losing people from that time. And like,
exactly.
It becomes a different kind of nostalgia. It becomes a different kind of, looking back, because there's a new element to it where like, there's definite, that you can't get a certain thing back, whereas before you might just be like, you might let yourself survive on the delusion that potentially one day you could meet up again and relive some of those feelings. But like the reality, at some point you do have to confront the fact that that's not going to happen. And a lot of the time, the thing that drives that home is actually losing someone. And so, yeah, it's one of the most powerful Menzinger songs. And I think the most successful execution of, I guess, what this record is about, because it delivers that blow and ties that home.
That song in particular was part of the process of loving this record, which, I loved Hello Exile at the outset, but I sort of didn't fully realize why, because I was focused in on how relatively disappointed I was to some degree, because just, for most of this band's career, they've been hitting the bullseye, and this is like in the bullseye, but in the circle around the red part. And so for a couple months after this release, that's sort of what lingered in my mind. And once I let it breathe for a while and got on to other things and then went back to it, I sort of realized just how much I loved it and how specifically the things that make it different from all of the records previous are really its greatest strengths. Preeminently, its Heartland rock feel. The song Farewell Youth, the closer, is, spoilers for when we do the big old lists. That is my favorite Menzinger song. We've talked a lot on the show about music that is particularly emotionally potent to us. And in that time, I think I've expressed a few times that I feel emotions very strongly, but I'm not really much of a crier. Like that's not just not a reaction that happens often. But I was re-listening to some of these albums just to make sure I was ready for this episode. And at like 3 a.m, I think the night before last, Farewell Youth came on, and I just sobbed. Like that song wrings it out of me. And it's not my favorite song of theirs just because it does that to me. I just think, for one, I think it's just flawlessly executed. It's perhaps the only track on here where I think the production choices 100% benefit what the song is going for. But it also just, it's so much of what I love about this band in one concise package. And the way that certain things are revealed throughout the story of the song is just so particularly potent, that it goes from a song that I initially thought was about mourning your adolescence and the idea that you can't go home again. I mean, it is about that in a very concrete sense, but I think really it's just about mourning someone that you spent your adolescence with. And this idea of you can't go home again is really about death and the impermanence of life. And you truly can't go home again when something that was a bedrock of that is gone in a way that isn't even vaguely replaceable.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, it's all about how loss affects you at all stages of your life, but often, the nature of loss changes as you get older, because even if you experience grief at a young age, like the older you get, the more you will experience it, the more it will happen, and the more that your feelings about it and your feelings about the past will change. And so, I mean, it hasn't really hit me until just sitting down here talking with you guys about it, like how powerful and brilliant that song is in terms of like bringing us to a close here. It's, and again, wherever they go next, whatever happens next, it will be in the wake of that, and it will represent continuing to live through that, and understanding that. I was going to bring this up. It's kind of a bit out of place now because it's kind of the conversation's moved past it. But just on the note of production, you mentioned Will Yip, who produced this, has a great resume. His production here, actually, in terms of what it does for the band, and I mean this all in a positive way, it actually reminds me of two other records he's produced that also represent a quite heavy band, taking a more kind of, not atmospheric necessarily, but kind of like dynamic, I guess, approach to their sound and peering back some of the proper crushingness. And those are, the first one of those records that he produced is La Dispute's Rooms of the House, which definitely represents like that band kind of still having a lot of intensity, but kind of bringing a bit more sort of cleanness and sort of like atmospheric dynamism to their sound there. And the other one is Pianos Become the Teeth's Keep You, as well, which represents them kind of peering back their screamo elements and kind of embracing more of a kind of cleaner post-rock sound. Both of those are records I love and have a really strong attachment to. They're also records I think are incredibly underrated in the context of the respective bands' discographies. And so while the execution on Hello Exile doesn't hit for me in the same way, I can appreciate it in the same kind of realm as those two records. And I think that as the Menzingers age, we should only expect them to mellow somewhat, and we should kind of embrace that and learn to experience this new stage of life with them, however that represents, however that comes across musically, wherever they go with that. We should, stop expecting records like, not that either of you or either of us are, but in general, you learn to stop expecting records like On the Impossible Past and Rented World and even After the Party, because, those were made when they had to be made and they represent a particular time, and you can't fake that again. And you have to move forward. And Hello Exile, though it doesn't always work for me, I will acknowledge does on some level understand that, even if it doesn't commit to it as fully as I would like it to. And so I'm very curious, and I have a lot of faith in whatever they do next to continue representing that push forward, that continuing to live, that getting older, and understanding and coming to terms with the way that your relationship to your past changes, but still on some level being the same sad asshole that you've always been. And that's the Menzingers. Morgan, I know they did a acoustic album version from Exile, acoustic versions of the songs on Hello Exile that were recorded in isolation. Anything worth noting about that release, or any particular things that you'd recommend checking out?
Yeah, I would just recommend checking out the whole thing, because I think all of this record is really well written. It's just that sometimes it gets buried in the production decisions, and this more pared back version of the album really lets those parts of it shine. Last to Know is probably my least favorite album Menzingers song post
debut.
Yep, that's the word. Of those 5 albums after debut, that's probably my least favorite song of theirs. And I still like the song. I just think it kind of lumbers around in that mid-tempo longer than it should. But I like the lead guitar line is replaced by a violin on the pared down version, and as a whole the song I think just works a lot better than it does on the album as a rock song. So yeah, there's definitely it's definitely worth a look.
Cool. Oh, well, there we go. We've made it to the end of this incredible discography, and we want to hear from you at home what you think. How would you rank the records? Which ones mean the most to you? What do you think of our takes and interpretations? If you have any stories about seeing this band live, or you're growing up with this band or connecting with this band, we want to hear from them. Please let us know in the comments below. We want to read your stories. We want to hear what this band means to you. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like. And if you enjoy what we do, please consider subscribing to the channel. I promise you, if you like this video, we have so many more like it, and we're going to continue to do so many more like it. So we would love to have you along for the ride. If you want to support us for just $1 a month, you can hit the join button, and that will entitle you to certain perks, such as having your name featured in the title crawl of every video on this channel, priority comment response, you get a little cute banner when you comment as well, and if you want to recommend us some music to listen to, your recommendation will go to the top of the pile. Connor and Morgan, I'm thrilled to be able to talk about this incredible discography with both of you, and there's only one thing left to say. Rock over London, rock on Chicago, Heineken, fuck that shit. Pubs, Blue Ribbon.